evening, everyone. Please be seated.
Under orders of the day, government motion number 103, adjourned debate, Mr. Rutherford.
Any honourable members wishing to join the debate? The honourable member for Calgary, Glenmore.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to take a moment to congratulate our new senators in waiting, Pam Davidson and Erica Baroudis. These women have worked incredibly hard to get where they are, and they should be rightly recognized for their accomplishments. Pam and Erica have demonstrated that Alberta women are strong-willed, determined, and only the sky is the limit. All those who ran for Senate positions in the last election, including 7 women, should be proud, as it is not easy to put your name forward in an election. The results of our recent Senate election will serve as an inspiration and powerful message for young girls across Canada. You can do it. For over 150 years, senators have gathered, deliberated, and debated in the Red Chamber. They serve an important role by providing a sober second thought to legislation that comes out of the House of Commons. It's important that our representation in the Senate is just as strong as our representation in the House of Commons. Senate elections in Alberta are especially important as our province has a unique and distinct history and cultural identity, and those tasked with the important responsibilities of representing Alberta's interests should be chosen by Albertans. Our province has a rich history with engaging in direct democracy, from voting against nationalizing public utilities in 1948 to more recent examples like voting against ratifying the Charlottetown Accord in 1992. However, we are often overlooked by the federal government as we can't offer the same vote-rich regions that Toronto and Montreal can. But it's imperative that we have an interprovincial lens and cooperation on the very important tasks that senators take on. It is more important than ever that we have strong Albertan voices in the Senate, and not senators the Prime Minister appoints out of political convenience. Albertans have sent a strong message, a clear message, that we believe Pam and Erica are the best people to represent our province. They will stand up for Alberta and make sure that Ottawa listens to our concerns. Having our own senators represent us is just one mechanism of our multi-pronged approach for getting a fair deal for Alberta as we move along in our province's recovery. Like all Albertans, Erica and Pam have an important role in writing the next great chapter of Alberta's story. Erica is a passionate community volunteer, giving her time to a variety of important causes, including the Edmonton Down Syndrome Society, Rotary International, and Fort Edmonton Park. She also serves as a mentor to young professionals in a number of organizations. Today, she works as a Western Canadian Vice President for a national strategic communications and public affairs company. In this role, Erica works with small businesses and some of Canada's biggest companies and nonprofits, helping them in job creation and investment in Western Canada. Pam is a small business owner, farmer, volunteer, and mother of 4 children in the Red Deer area. Born and raised Albertan, she has been actively involved in her community for many years and has been a strong political advocate at the municipal, provincial, and federal level. She knows what issues truly matter to us and will be a great advocate for the province. They are both trailblazers in their own right, and we should be proud. However, the final step in getting these 2 incredible Albertans to the Senate is for Prime Minister Trudeau to recommend the appointment of these senators in waiting to the Governor General. Prime Minister, Albertans have spoken loud and clear in this election, and you need to listen to the democratic will of the people of Alberta. We've sent a clear mandate, and it is important that our voices are heard. This is not only a critical moment for Albertans, but for young women all across Canada. What kind of message will it send if the accomplishments and hard work of these women is discarded in favor of political patronage?
Wishing to join the debates on Government Motion 103. Seeing the honourable member for Cardston Tabor Warner.
Just table.
Tabor Warner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am pleased to be rising this evening to speak to this motion. Over 1.1 million Albertans voted in the Senate elections on October 18th, and Senate nominees have been selected. While I am sure we can all agree that we wish voter turnout was higher, this does not diminish the results. Those who chose not to engage in the democratic process tell the rest that it does not matter to them what the results are, which means we can take the results as being endorsed by those who chose not to participate. Putting your name forward to run for any type of public office is hard. In today's environment, regardless of what side of the political fence you are on, you open yourself up to increasingly nasty comments and harassment. I want to thank all of the Senate candidates that put their names forward to represent Alberta in the Senate, and to congratulate our 3 successful nominees, Pam Davidson, Erica Brudis, and Mikhailo Martiniak, thank you. Committing to serve in the Senate is not a small one at this present time, being sworn in until the age of 75. Even more impressive is the fact that all of these individuals recognized in one way or another that Senate elections are valuable to our democracy. Senators do important work in checking and balancing government legislation at the federal level. The Senate is supposed to make sure that one part of the country is not devastated by any particular piece of legislation. Well, we can see that this isn't happening now, which brings me to the faults in our current system and why Senate elections are so important. While it is one thing to respect traditions, the practice of the Prime Minister recommending to Her Majesty the appointments they would like, it is counterproductive to the very nature of what the Senate is supposed to do. If senators are expected to represent their province's interests and provide that check and balance in our system, then it is highly inappropriate for the Prime Minister to be the one to appoint them, without any kind of indication from voters as to who they desire to represent them. Without an actual election that would undermine nominees or determine nominees for the Senate is opened up to the possibility of becoming just a rubber stamp for the government and its agenda at the time. Indeed, Madam Speaker, it has at times become a game with prime ministers. Just before an election is called, appoint as many like-minded senators as possible, and if you don't win, it disrupts your successor's plans. If you do win, it makes life easier when you're trying to pass legislation. Even the recent move to make many senators independent does not change the fact that they were appointed because they were of like mind to the Prime Minister that sent them there. This really shouldn't be up to the Prime Minister at all, particularly when the Prime Minister, such as our current one, only got 32.6% of the vote in an election. It is even more inappropriate that a Prime Minister that only got 15.5% of the vote in Alberta should choose on his own whim who should represent our great province. In a democracy, when a senator is expected to serve the people of the province that they represent, it should be up to the voters to decide who that is. The recent Senate nominees put their names out there for an election, knowing full well that even though Albertans might choose them as senators in waiting, the Prime Minister might not bother to recognize the will of Albertans. This is disturbing that any Prime Minister would think of not appointing those senators that Albertans have selected. That is essentially the Prime Minister telling the electorate of one of the provinces of the country he leads that he does not care about their opinion. I wish I could say that Albertans would be surprised that a Prime Minister would reject their democratic voice, but when it comes to our current Prime Minister and his father, well, there would be no surprise there, Madam Speaker. Earlier this year, we reintroduced the ability for Albertans to have their voice heard in Senate elections. It is no secret that Albertans have long pushed for an elected Senate as part of a Triple E Senate dream: equal, elected, and effective. The Triple E Senate push began here in Western Canada with the Reform Party several decades ago, and Albertans have taken it to heart. By allowing Senate elections in Alberta, we put our words and desires into action and allow for at least 2 of the 3 E's to become a reality: elected and effective. Truly, Madam Speaker, a senator cannot actually be effective if they are not accountable to the electorate that they serve. Further, they cannot be truly accountable for their actions in the Senate if they are not elected. This is why we are pushing for Senate elections. Of course, ideally, we would be holding regular Senate elections Canada-wide for all senators every 4 years or so to keep them accountable. Unfortunately, that requires constitutional reform that isn't likely to happen anytime soon for a variety of reasons. In Alberta, electing senators in waiting is something we can do in the meantime while the rules as they presently exist, and as we have, hopefully will change. This spring, we also urged the Prime Minister to wait until that election was over to appoint 2 of the successful candidates. Much to my surprise, Madam Speaker, he seems to have not seemed to have listened to that for that moment, waited for that moment. Now, I join with other members in this House to encourage him to do the right thing. I hope that he will let Albertans know that while he does not respect our energy sector, he at least has respect for our democratic will. He should select and appoint from the senators in waiting that Albertans have selected. As the House of Commons looks to resume its business shortly, I hope that he will not wait too much longer. Alberta at least deserves to have all of its Senate seats filled. These senators in waiting are good people, Madam Speaker. They have Alberta's best interests at heart. I know 2 out of the 3 personally, and I am sure that they would make us proud. I look forward in optimism that the Prime Minister will do the right thing. Thank you.
Any other members wishing to join the debate on Government Motion 103, the Honourable Member for Lac St. Anne Parkland?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's kind of interesting. Motion 103, some of my fellow colleagues have stood up here and said we've reconstituted the electoral process when it comes to senators. Some folks may look down their nose at it with disdain and say, well, it's not really binding. But, part of the reasons are we're hoping to make a little bit of an impact and make a difference. And I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here when it comes to the whole democracy in our country. Passing a couple workers in the hallway, and I'm not going to mention their names. We got to know folks over the last couple of years here. So there's, the janitorial service, the folks that keep the lights on for us, the folks that keep us safe here at night, the ones that, get to record what we're saying, and we have that common courtesy of passing each other because we tend to work the graveyard shift. And one of the individuals today had noticed that I've been running a couple shifts. I've been working day shift, night shift, and everything else. And typically that's what happens when you're the local guy. You try to cover off for other folks, and we do that as a team. It's that camaraderie. And the gentleman had asked, what are you doing? Where are you going? I said, well, I can't get enough of that democracy. Coming back and talking about it. And he says, is there any left? This is what happens when we don't respect the electoral process. This is what happens when there's voter apathy. This is what happens when people are taking a lot of knocks on the chin. In Western Canada, we've taken our fair share of knocks on the chin. Taking our fair share of knocks when it comes to our energy sector. We have a bunch of concerns that may get poo-pawed down east by some folks that understand how much Alberta contributes to this country, how much we wish to continue to contribute to this country, but we want our own share. We want to be recognized. We want that fair shake. When we passed that bill earlier in the year to put the Senate election back on the table, we knew it wasn't a slam dunk. We knew we'd have to have some debate in here. We knew that the Prime Minister doesn't have to recognize it, but our fellow Albertans do. There's only so many things that we can do at a provincial level to try to compel or wish along or to try to instill some more of that democracy. So to the individual that I saw in the hallway, thank you. Thank you for bringing to light that real God-honest truth of why are we doing this. So I want to thank those individuals that put their name forward, and I'm going to read the copy of the motion, Motion 103. It's that be it resolved, the Legislative Assembly recognize and pursuant to the Alberta Senate Election Act, over 1.1 million Albertans participated in the October 18th election to nominate for nominees for the Senate of Canada. I wish to congratulate, or the motion does, congratulate the greatest number of votes for Pam Davidson, Eric Brudes, Michaela Matarniuk, and Michaela, if I messed it up, I apologize. I've met you a few times, and being married to a Ukrainian lady, you'd think I'd get her right one day, but I apologize in advance. And to recognize the candidates Alberta's nominees for Senate of Canada, to call on the Prime Minister to respect the democratic decision of Albertans by recommending to Her Majesty the Queen 2 of these nominees to be summoned to the Senate of Canada to fill those 2 vacant seats. And I'm going to read that one again. We call on the Prime Minister to respect the democratic decision of 1.1 million Albertans to recognize who we'd like to send to the Senate on our behalf, to represent the interests, and to not just be appointed. Because that's how we feel here in Alberta in the West. And you want to talk about folks that are disenfranchised. I have never seen so many people talking about separation. It seems every time we turn around, there's something else that's kicking us. We've got either an economic crisis where we've got to deal with weathers, we've got to deal with droughts. We've been talking at length, for the members opposite and internally about the droughts and the conditions. I refer to this as God's country how many times, and I love this province. I love this country. I was looking back in some of our records, and folks say, on some of the Twitter posts and whatever else might be floating around out there, well, you're just all concentrated on your area. You don't really care about the country. Well, holy crow. Family genealogy in 1751, the first Getsons came over and rolled over to Nova Scotia from Friesland, East Friesland. So even before the country was formed, oh yeah, my grandpappy, my grandpa Getson, was from Prince Edward Island, the place where we had...
Realize the name might be your own, and not about you, but it's still not allowed in this assembly because it is your name.
My apologies. Yeah, thank you for the clarification, Madam Speaker. So my relatives that share the same name that starts with a G. From Prince Edward Island, where we signed the Constitution in 1867, and then they came out west. So the history here in the fabric, and I've had a chance to work right across the country. And once you start dealing with folks, and again, that linear construction, those projects will do that for you. It really binds and shows, and I've spoken a couple times about these major projects. We can't just pull it off by ourselves. And we can't just be independent. We're not an island. So the folks that want separation, well, I'd love to carve off the rest of the country, give us ocean access and do that. We can't. And by the way, it's a pretty darn good country. We kind of want to be part of it. We want to continue that process. But the frustrations, the carbon tax kind of was the thing that started it. Then we had Bill C-48, and then we had Bill C-69, and then we had Tech, and then Northern Gateway, and Energy East, and Trans Mountain. It just goes on and on and on. So if there's anything, Prime Minister, I've never met you, I'd like to, so we could have a frank coffee conversation and let you really know how we feel out here. I'm sure others have, but try to compel you to at least throw us a bone here. 1.1 million Albertans want their senators. We want to have a fair shake. We want electoral reform that you'd asked for and you'd said and campaigned on your original campaign that you were going to give us. We'd really love to see that come to fruition. We'd like to have that voice that's there, that when the chips are down or when that interest comes in and we're lobbying as the energy minister has before, and that those senators that we elect take that into consideration, that they consider the best not only just for the country, but the best for our region as well, and to know that we're an integral part of it. So former Prime Minister had put a lot of hope into us for restoring that Senate and reforming it. And I'm sure hoping that happens one day. So again, to Pam, Erica, and Michaelo, it was great to meet you over the last couple of years in different times, and to hear your passion even before you were running as senators, to tell us about your feel and your tapestry and your feel for the province and how you would represent us. And I really hope that carries forward. And I'm hoping that the members opposite join us in this too. And don't want to be in my soapbox and talking about our province so much. And I know that we kind of get cross-threaded once in a while based on our political spectrum and ideas. But I honestly do feel that the folks wouldn't be here unless they had the province's best interest at heart. And I think one of the best ways to demonstrate that would be to help us vote on this motion and send out that message to your friends down east as well, that we would really, 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 really for Christmas, if anything, like to have a couple senators put down there for us. So with that, Madam Speaker, obviously you can tell I'm pretty passionate about it. It's also getting pretty punchy in the low hours here of low sleep, and I want to make sure I don't get cross-threaded or out of line anymore by going on too long. But that's why this motion is important. And for the gentleman in the hallway again and the other folks here, democracy is still alive as long as we keep it alive, and as long as we're genuine to our founding fathers and the principles of this country and the legislation that's in place, that we can still keep that democratic process and represent the folks that take the time to go out there, put their name out, give up their time to do that, and for all the folks that show up and vote. So Prime Minister Trudeau, 2 out of 3 wouldn't be too bad. Thank you.
Any other members wishing to join the debate? The Honourable Member for Red Deer South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to speak very briefly in favor of Motion 103. And I want to do that because one of the successful elected senators, Pam Davidson, is a personal friend of mine. She is from Central Alberta, and she received the highest number of votes from Albertans in these Senate elections. And I just want to share with the legislature a little bit of information that speaks to the character of my friend Pam Davidson. Pam Davidson is an active servant leader in the community. That would describe her very well. Like many strong women in our communities, she leads by example. She is one of the principal organizers of a tradition that we have in Central Alberta called the Mayor's Prayer Breakfast. And Pam Davidson is one of the principal organizers. And at that prayer breakfast, mayors throughout Central Alberta would come together with other communities, and the prayers would be said that they would make good decisions that would serve the interests in their communities in the course of their service. And Madam Speaker, certainly during these challenging times, if there was ever a need for the assistance of Providence for governments, that time is certainly now. And of course, with the election of the United Conservative Party government, she was also one of the principal organizers of the Premier's Prayer Breakfast that we had in Edmonton prior to COVID. Madam Speaker, I just want to say that the Senate elections are not a waste of time. I think as Albertans, it's really important that we do what is right, that we act in a principled way and let the consequences follow. And it's important to give Albertans a voice in who they wish to represent them in the Senate in Canada. Madam Speaker, I've been reading a newspaper article that frames our current Prime Minister as the first NDP Prime Minister. Madam Speaker, there is some validity to that assessment. But more concerning to me is, my concern is that we perhaps have elected the first separatist Prime Minister. The current Prime Minister has created more division in our country than any other Prime Minister in the past by a very wide margin. And in order to help have more peace and to have more unity, I hope to see the Prime Minister choose to do what is right, respect the voice of Albertans, and appoint this principled woman, as well as the other successful candidates to the Senate. I hope we do what is right here, and I'm favoring this motion. Thank you very much.
Any other members that wish to join the debate on Government Motion 103? Seeing none, just sit down. I will call the question. On Government Motion 103, as moved by the Honourable Government House Leader, on behalf of the Honourable Minister of Justice, all those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. No. That is carried. A division has been called. Ring the bells. division has been called on Government Motion 103. All those in favor of the motion, please stand.
The Honourable Ms. Schultz, the Honourable Mrs. Savage, the Honourable Mr. Taves, the Honourable Mr. Wilson, the Honourable Mr. Dreeshen, the Honourable Mr. Nicolaides, Mr. Walker, or Mr. Long, Mr. Amory, the Honourable Ms. Pond, the Honourable Ms. Isaac, Mr. Scow, the Honourable Mr. Nally, the Honourable Mr. Yassine, the Honourable Ms. Furr, the Honourable Mr. Horner, Mr. Van Dyken, Mr. Yao, Mr. Getson, Mr. Newdorf, Mrs. Fry, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Hunter, Mr. Singh, Mr. Turton, Mr. Staffen, Mr. Hanson, Mr. Tour.
Well done. Anyone opposed to Government Motion 103, please stand.
Mr. Shepherd, Ms. Gray, Member Cece, Mr. Fian, Mr. Dack, Member Hoffman, Member Loyola.
So do I have to edit anything or no? No. Speaker, total for the motion 27, total against 7.
Well, members, that is so carried. And a round of applause for the table officers, getting half a face right.
Thank you. Under Government Bills and Orders for second reading, Bill 76, Captive Insurance Companies Act, adjourned debate. Honourable Mr. Taves.
Are there members wishing to join the debate on second reading of Bill 76? The Honourable Member for Edmonton, Rutherford.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to address this bill and to essentially pose a few questions or thoughts to the Minister, because I have kind of yet to determine how I feel about voting for this bill or not, and hoping that they can help me make up my mind a little bit. I understand the intent of this bill. I understand that, it does reflect legislation that exists in other places in some ways, that captive insurance is a practice that is in existence in other jurisdictions, and in fact is available to even Alberta companies if they wish to go abroad to get that kind of information. But I guess I just have some general thoughts about it. I'd like to support the bill, I think, in the end. And so I just want to just put forward some of the things that I am concerned about, because unfortunately, the problem with the bill, really from my perspective, is that so much of it is left unsaid, and that it really is a bill that as we always say, the devil will be in the details, and in this case, that's in regulations, and it leaves me with some concerns. I understand that the primary intent here is one of risk assessment and risk management. Very important thing for all of us. One I certainly think is an appropriate role for government to be concerned about, because the consequences of having a risk go the wrong way is very devastating for people, whether that be in business such as in this circumstance, or in any variety of other community situations. And we know the consequences of taking a chance and thinking, oh, it's going to be okay, and it's not okay. Sometimes the consequence is very severe. We've seen that with COVID. If you make the wrong choice, the consequences can be people's lives or livelihoods. And so that leaves me with some concerns a little bit about what is happening here in this bill. I'm wondering a little bit about whether or not the minister can perhaps stand up in the House and fill in a few small pieces of the detail. My concerns are that companies will essentially be able to create a secondary company that will take on a substantial amount of risk on their behalf. So let's just look at the idea that they do that seems to be a reasonable strategy. Spread it out. I mean, that's essentially what insurance does anyways around the world. Every insurance company is insured by other insurance companies. That's how we make sure that it all works. And that when there are catastrophic circumstances in one place, it's not all put on a single company, and therefore we don't have a situation where a company at the worst possible time ends up by folding and not being able to pay out insurance because they indeed have spread out their risk to other insurance companies. So I'm happy to see that that's what's happening here. But my concern is that this is moving outside of the market forces in some ways. And that is that normally what happens is the insurance company would go to the insurance market and seek insurance based on the larger market's assessment of risk in a particular situation, and would then get a fair price for some insurance and would be able to spread out their risk that way. But in this case, they're not going to the market. They're not going out and saying, give me your assessment of what my plans are and tell me what that is worth and give me a fair price for mediating the risk that I need to take. Instead, what they're doing is they're saying, I'm actually going to defy the wisdom of markets. I'm going to say the market is wrong, that the price that the free market wants to give me for insurance is too high. And as such, I am going to create an entity that will give me my backup insurance in defiance of the wisdom of the larger market, which is a very interesting thing for free enterprise government to want to do. Yes?
Thank you for allowing the intervention. This point I wanted you to expand on, the one you've landed on just now. Because
Honourable members, as this is the second speech, interventions
Oh,
are not yet allowed, but the next one will certainly be all yours.
Oh, right. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford.
Thank you. Yeah, we're all getting used to this. Thank you. I appreciate the direction. So anyway, I guess it worries me a little bit when that happens, because when that works well, when you create your own risk body by creating your own captive insurance company, you're essentially telling the market that they are wrong and that the wisdom of the market is wrong and that you, in fact, should have some insurance at a price that you can afford and not the price that the market would like to give it to you for, which is a bit of a concerning thing for me, because that means that we're actually saying the best minds in insurance out there tell you you should not have insurance. And you're going to say to them, I want it anyways, so I'm going to create an entity to do that. Now, I'm giving you the worst example of it here, but it's in order to illustrate a point. Now, if it works well, and the captive insurance company is able to actually provide some risk management and help to divide out some of the risks that are involved and keep a company well and do well itself, great. I'm happy for this all to happen. Would certainly think that we want to have that as an option in society. My concern is that we end up with a situation that we've started to see here in this province with the issue of orphaned wells. And that is, we have very successful companies that have a liability, and one of the best ways to get rid of that liability is to sell it off to a different company. And what we're seeing, not because there's malfeasance per se, and I want to be really clear about that, I'm hoping that nobody's actually doing this purposely to cheat. But what happens is that large successful companies in the oil and gas industry give the orphan or the well liabilities, to the smaller, less endowed companies. And when they fail, those smaller companies, it ends up back on the public purse because we have all of these orphan wells. And it's supposed to be taken care of by our Orphan Well Society and so on in this province. But we know that government, in fact, both governments of the last two governments have actually had to step in and help in these circumstances with orphan wells. So what's happening is there's a transfer of risk from large successful corporations to the people of the province of Alberta. Now, I don't think that happens all the time, or I don't think that that's sort of the definition of experience, but it does happen on occasion. Enough that we've actually seen it to be a problem, and we've actually seen people in the province of Alberta actually have to put money out in order to accommodate the transfer of liability away from people who should have taken responsibility for it to companies, to the general public in this province. And so I'm concerned about the possibility of that happening in this situation. A company creates a captive insurance agency, transfers the worst of their risk, the most edgy, the most dangerous risk that they have on their portfolio into the captive insurance company. And then if that captive insurance company ends up having to do a big payout and it fails, we'll simply fold the company up, declare bankruptcy, and it's all over. They don't pay out what they don't have. And the originator company has passed on all the risk to whom? And the answer, again, is going to be the people of the province of Alberta. That in the end, that's who it is that's going to have to fork out the money to make up for it when a captive company goes bad. And, you know, I'm hoping that that's not something that happens too often. But because we can't see all the regulations, we don't know what kind of measures are being put in place to ensure that A, that doesn't happen, or B, if it does happen, that there are ways that we can protect the citizens of the province of Alberta from this behavior on the part of large successful companies that are passing on public risk to private cost. So that's my primary concern. And what highlights that concern for me is the fact that under this bill, it appears that the captive insurance companies are actually allowed to take on a greater degree of risk. That is, to take on, to create circumstances under which the amount of liability that they have is in excess of the typical liability that is allowed for normal insurance companies. And so perhaps the minister can help me understand that. Indeed, is that true? Can these captive companies take on a greater degree or a different range of risks that are available to regular insurance companies? And if so, why would you do that? Why would you set up a circumstance where you have a company that is outside of the norms of what we've determined to be appropriate risk management through hundreds of years of practice of insurance? And if you're doing that, it increases my concern that they're being used as an opportunity to transfer risk into a place where the originating company will not be responsible, and the ultimate demise of the captive insurance company will be on somebody else's plate, and typically the plate of Albertans. That's the concern for me. Now, I certainly would be attentive to the minister standing up and helping to walk me through some of that. I do appreciate that there are reasons why we do need to create these circumstances. I understand the nature of a hard market, but as I said, a hard market is the market telling you that they're not prepared to manage your risk for the price you want them to manage you for. There is a wisdom that you are betraying when you do that. Otherwise, the market would insure you. You wouldn't need to do this. The market would come forward. Now, I understand in Alberta there's a special circumstance that's causing some problems with this here, and that is that oil and gas companies seem to be having some increasing difficulty with regard to ESG, or environmental, social, and corporate governance movements in terms of corporate. Geez, I can't get my language tonight. I don't know why. But the ESG movement is actually making it harder for companies to get the insurance, and that part of the reason why we would be doing this is so that we could create companies that do not feel the pressure of the ESG movement, which is of a deep concern for me. I mean, I've long been someone who believed that companies are amoral entities. That is, they're not either good or bad. They just simply do what they do. And some of them do it well, and some of them do it poorly. But people are not amoral. People are moral by their very nature. And it's okay to have companies that just simply want to increase profit in the world, as long as we also increase the complexity of how we handle those companies in this world by allowing the influence of people to say some things, even though they make profit, are not okay. That are things that we shouldn't be doing. That we want the world to go in a particular direction because some things are just not good. You know, I certainly could have made a lot of money in high school selling drugs in my high school. But I absolutely chose not to do that. And not because there wasn't profit to be made. There certainly was. But I chose not to do it because of a moral stance I have around the use of those kind of products in high school. And that's the nature of ESG, is that we're saying to corporations, yes, please, do what corporations do well. Create a business, create profit from that, help pay out your shareholders, and create products that we all use in the society. But please don't do so in such a way that it causes harm in other ways. Maybe perhaps unintentional ways, but in ways that were not originally intended. So those externalities, as they're often referred to. And if you were actually creating a bill to allow people to create an entity that allows them to not feel the pressure of ESG, then what you're saying is that we are trying to avoid the citizens' directive to govern in a moral way, in a way beyond the simple question of profit. And if you do that, then you might be opening the door to things that are very undesirable, to business practices that are not okay, in the modern sense of that. Business practices that reflect that avarice of hundreds of years ago, when anything you did to make money was all right. Didn't matter if it damaged the environment, didn't matter if it enslaved people, it didn't matter if it did anything else. And we have absolutely certainly have spent the last few hundred years saying all of those things are not okay and constructing a new kind of business in our world. But this is a slight shift backwards. This is a shift away from saying the desires of people to live in a certain kind of society can be subverted. And so that's what concerns me here. If the oil and gas companies are having trouble getting insurance because of ESG pressures, there's a really important message there. And that important message is that the most free enterprise market in the world, the insurance market, is telling you that you can't just do whatever you want. I mean, this is not radical lefties that are doing this. This is the major insurers and financiers in the world who are adopting ESG and telling oil and gas that if you do X, Y, and Z, we do not want to insure you. That's an incredibly important message. And it's not from the enemy. It's from the people who you've been working with for the last 30 or 40 or 50 or 100 years. And from people who like what you do, who want to see you grow and be successful. But they're still telling you that we cannot allow businesses to only govern themselves on the basis of profit. Now, certainly, internally, that can be their goal. That's the right thing for a business to do, is to try to increase profits. But because we are human beings with a moral stance on the universe, we need to be able to layer complexity upon that. And the complexity that we layer is that some things are not okay. You can't go into the Amazon jungle and destroy villages so that you can harvest trees and dig for gold on their ancestral lands. You just can't do that anymore. We did that for many, many generations. But we've decided as a society that that just really isn't okay anymore. You can't go into a community and rip up the ground and destroy all the water with selenium and make it impossible for people to feed their cattle and to water their crops because whatever it is that you did has destroyed the land. We say those things now because people are intrinsically moral and they wish other people to live good lives. And so as a result, the process that we have developed to express that is the ESG movement. And I guess that's where I'm worried about this here. is not that I think this is going to happen every day. I don't think this is a big wide open door. What I'm worried about is because we cannot see the regulations, that there's no way for me to ask you specific enough questions about how do we ensure that while we try to do the right thing, we do not allow terrible externalities or terrible unintended consequences to occur. So that's my concern here. I certainly would like to be able to support this. I understand the nature of risk management. I fundamentally believe in it from a very different angle than most business people, but my whole support of things like public education and public health care really are, let's all pool our resources to manage the risks of poor health. Let's manage the risks of poor education. Let's manage the risks of societies that don't have the wherewithal to take care of people in a good way. The more we reduce poverty, the more we reduce ill health, the more we reduce poor education, the more we will all be uplifted. So I understand risk management. I understand the nature of us all pooling together to get a good outcome. And so this is good. But I think I've laid out my concern. I think my concern is you are allowing these companies to have a new breadth of risk that isn't true in the regular market. And you're establishing these companies in such a way that in the worst possible situation, a successful company will offload its liabilities, allow a subsidiary or a captive insurance company to take the hit, take the loss, and fail, and the ultimate cost will come back to society and not be borne by the company that initiated it. And that we'll be in the same position that we're in right now with oil and gas, where we're saying we have a huge liability. Are we going to be able to handle it? Are we going to be able to deal with this in some way? And we already know that the last two governments have already decided the oil and gas companies are not handling it and that they need some assistance in handling it. We know the federal government has contributed to that as well. Thank you.
Honourable members, just a reminder that interventions are now available, and Honourable Minister of Finance is not eligible to speak as he moved the initial second reading. Are there any other members that would like to join the debate? We'll go with the Honourable Member for Calgary East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is a privilege and pleasure to rise and speak to Bill 76, the Captive Insurance Companies Act. Through Bill 76, the Government of Alberta is working to allow captive insurance companies to set up shop in Alberta. This option for insurance already exists in the province of British Columbia, but this will be the first time such an option will be available in Alberta. A captive insurance company is an insurance provider that is owned by the company is insuring. It is an in-house insurance solution, usually sought when traditional insurance are actually unable to provide necessary coverage. Many large investors, especially Alberta's energy companies, already have the funds they need to cover potential liabilities, but in many cases, these companies are still required by law to have insurance. The Captive Insurance Companies Act, Bill 76, will allow these companies to use those funds to create their own insurance provider. This is an important step to help attract insurance capacity to the province, to enhance insurance options, and ultimately expand availability and lower prices. The government is taking this bold step because right now there is limited supply of insurance providers. This limited supply drives up the price and can make insurance even harder to come by. The lack of insurance options has a negative impact on Alberta's economy, as companies that want to invest in Alberta may be focused to look elsewhere if they cannot get the insurance they need. Allowing captive insurance company will provide a viable insurance alternative for the Alberta economy and for those looking to invest in it. It is also important because in addition to dealing with the declining insurance capacity, many energy companies, for example, are finding it hard and harder to find willing providers. So many are under significant pressure from anti-energy campaigns and foreign activists to boycott investments in oil and gas development in Alberta's world-class energy sector. So Bill 76 will provide more options for these companies, which often already have the funds they need to cover their liabilities. This is in keeping with the government goal of removing red tape, boosting the Alberta economy, and creating more jobs for Albertans, and creating more flexibility. Insurance options is one of the ways this government is making Alberta the best places to do businesses. And I mentioned before, Alberta is only the second province in Canada to allow captive insurance companies. But globally, there are about 70 jurisdictions that have some sort of captive insurer legislation. Bill 76 was developed by the Alberta government using the best practices from British Columbia, Bermuda, Barbados, and other successful jurisdictions that have been successful in allowing captive insurance. Under proposed legislation, Alberta licensed captive insurance will be allowed to insure the risk of a single entity. Alberta licensed captive insurance will be also allowed to insure members of an association, for example, an industry group with complex insurance needs. Bill 76 also includes requirements to ensure captive insurance companies are conducting businesses according to sound financial and corporate governance principles. The bill will make provision for regulations that will be tailored to this effort, and the minister expects to have this produced in the spring of 2022. To keep this bill in line with the government's objective of creating jobs and making Alberta a great place to invest, the bill will require any captive insurance providers to be physically located in Alberta. Requiring captive insurance providers to be located in Alberta will help diversify Alberta's economy and stimulate job creation in the finance and insurance sectors. It is true there are already Alberta businesses that utilize captive insurance providers to meet their needs, but until now, when they have wanted to utilize captive insurance, they have had to establish their providers outside of Alberta. The status quo makes no sense. Companies should be able to access the service they need right here in Alberta, and it's time to bring this business activity home and allow captive insurance. The government's goal is to help Alberta businesses insure their risk. That is why Bill 76 takes the necessary steps to allow more insurance options in the province to help businesses deal with current pricing and availability pressures. And I want to thank the Minister for bringing forward this important piece of legislation. And thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Ellerslie, followed by the Honourable Member for Lac-Saint and Parkland.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for acknowledging me and giving me this opportunity to speak to Bill 76. And I have to say, I applaud the member from Edmonton, Rutherford, who did a fantastic job of outlining some very real concerns regarding this bill. And I share many of them. And Madam Speaker, I just want to let you know that, when I was younger than I am now, not that I'm old, but younger than I am now, I learned from an elder in my community. I remember her telling me that there's a difference between asking, and I'll translate as soon as I say the word in Spanish. There's a big difference between asking por qué, why, and para qué, what for. There's a big difference between this. So as I started reading through this particular bill, and I was even in the back with some of my colleagues, and I was asking them the why question. Well, I get the why. And the real concerning part is the for what. And what are the implications that has on what can potentially happen if this bill is passed. And I just wanted to reiterate, as what was well stated by the member from Edmonton Rutherford. And the fact is that collective insurance companies are saying, we are not prepared to take this risk. We don't want to take this risk. And there's two parts to that. So, the member from Edmonton Rutherford focused on the energy industry. But there's also the catastrophic losses. And as we saw this past summer with the hailstorm in northeast Calgary, we're seeing more and more catastrophic events happen, whether they be natural or man-made influenced. And the reason for that is that it's connected to climate change. Now, I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact writing of the member from Calgary who just spoke. The big bad boogeyman for the UCP are environmental activists and indigenous nations that have these foreign campaigns that are somehow trying to influence the process. And, I've spoken about it in this house before, is the fact that, Milton Friedman and his buddies over at the Chicago school were really big on just writing off externalities. They were like, these are things that don't really have a cost, an economic cost, as we see them in the market. Granted, they're not in the market. That's why they're called externalities. That's why these economists decided to call it an externality outside of the market. But these costs are very real. And they're very real, and they impact not only the generation that is living that moment, but as we've seen with the process of colonization, the continued process of imperialism, as it has occurred throughout the world, it continues to have a cost, a human cost, a social cost, an environmental cost. Now, to my brothers and sisters in the Global South, and specifically, I'm thinking about in Bolivia. They went so far. Now I understand that this may be completely foreign to some of the people in this room. This may be absolutely foreign to the people in this room. Is that they chose in the country's constitution. And it's not only Bolivia, by the way. Ecuador has also done this as well. But they chose to recognize the rights of Mother Earth. Now, of course, these are countries that have a bigger population, a greater population of indigenous peoples within them. And the state of Bolivia is even known as a plurinationalist state. Wrap your head around that for a second. Well, maybe you need a minute or an hour. It's a plurinationalist state. Why? Because indigenous nations are actually recognized, their rights are recognized, their cosmology, their understanding of the world is recognized within the constitution of that country. Now, you want to talk about truth and reconciliation, Madam Speaker? Let's go there. That's what I'm saying. Let's go there. And I'm not saying that because I'm trying to be radical. I'm saying it because indigenous peoples have had to suffer the economic downfall and the externalities of this system that we currently live in the most aggressive and abhorrent way than any other people on this planet. Indigenous people have had to trade in their lives, their culture, because their cosmology, their understanding of the world did not fit the economic system that the powers that be wanted to enforce and prescribe upon humanity at that time. Think about that. So when I get up in this House, Madam Speaker, and I'm speaking to the issue of captive insurance companies, and you're telling me that the indigenous peoples, indigenous nations, environmental activists are the big bad boogeyman of this bill, and that insurance companies do not want to take on the risk based on this? This is a fallacy, Madam Speaker. Because the insurance companies are smart enough to know that the risk is too immense. And as was boldly stated by the member from Edmonton Rutherford, it's a risk that this market doesn't want to fill. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that captive insurance companies are a bad thing in themselves. I'm not necessarily saying that. But what I am saying is that there's a lot of room for error on the way that this bill has been brought forward in this House. Specifically, I'd like to focus on the fact that everything is just supposed to happen in the regulations. Everything is just supposed to happen in the regulations, according to this minister who's brought this piece of proposed legislation into this House. So essentially, here we are once again inside the legislature with the United Conservative Party saying, just trust us. Now, Madam Speaker, given the current context that we're in the current economic reality that we're in the global pandemic that we're in, and how this government has chosen to govern at this particular time, you're telling me to just trust them? Albertans do not want to trust them. And that's what Albertans are saying. And the members over there are just laughing it up. They're laughing it up because, Albertans don't trust them based on how they've chosen to govern through this pandemic. And, I wouldn't be laughing if I were them, Madam Speaker, because I'll be quite honest, their actions lately have been quite shameful. Indeed, they have been quite shameful.
Honourable members. Seems to be a lot of other conversations happening in here, which is great. I think that those conversations could happen outside of here. Honourable member for Edmonton Ellerslie, we are on Bill 76.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Honourable member, just a reminder that we are on Bill 76. There has been quite a bit of latitude given to you throughout this speech. There are many times in which some of the words that are being used are inciting all sorts of disorder in this House, and I just ask that you focus on the matter at hand, in which I know you're a skilled debater, and I look forward to the remaining portion of your speech on Bill 76.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And indeed, when it comes to captive insurance companies and the fact that this minister would like actually to bring this forward when insurance companies themselves are not willing to take on the risk within this market, we got to ask ourselves the question, why? Right? Why? And I get it. I get it. You know, that's, it's, but, you know, the reasons why that the member from, I'm sorry, I can't remember is it Calgary Northwest? East. Or Calgary East? Calgary is the city. The member from Calgary East, and the reasons why he was saying that insurance companies feel pressured not to take on this risk were, for me, just as far away from reality as could possibly be. But you know what? We're living in a very different time. And you know, and I really wish that the members on the opposite side would really stop to contemplate that, okay, let's take it for a second that the insurance companies, yes, are being strong-armed by environmental activist group into not insuring for these particular reasons. Let's imagine that this is true. Reality is, oh, please, go ahead.
Thank you, Speaker, for a slight intervention. I wanted to ask the honourable member from Edmonton Ellerslie if he indeed estimated that the reasoning, to answer the question of why we're at the point where around the world we see an increase in the number of jurisdictions which do have captive insurance available to them, although there's not a lot of them. It's about 6,700 globally right now, and since early 1960s that's been growing. But does he feel that this growth in offering, enabling different jurisdictions to create captive insurance is as a result of a market failure? Is a result of the insurance market not being able to provide the risk insurance that companies need right now? And what questions behind that would he be asking if indeed he does believe it's actually a market failure?
Well, members, just a reminder on interventions to still speak through the chair, and just be aware that the microphone on your desk can only pick you up if you're speaking forward. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. How much time do I have left, Madam Chair, if you don't mind?
Your 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So, to answer the question that was brought by the member from Edmonton McClung in his interjection, and why it is, I was saying, okay, so let's assume that the big bad boogeyman that the member from Edmonton, or Calgary East, pardon me, was giving the reason for. Let's imagine that this is true. I don't necessarily think that it's activists themselves. I think that Albertans, and not every Albertan, and I'm not going to say it's every Albertan, but the majority of Albertans, the majority of Canadians, the majority of the people around the world understand the challenges with climate change. And as those relate in terms of just across the board, natural and man-made disasters, they understand the impacts that is having on the insurance industry. Now, as that particular subject relates to the energy industry and the problems, the challenges that have been created by past practice in the energy industry, Albertans understand this. Insurance companies understand this. Albertans understand that there are real environmental and social costs to the decisions that are made by industry. And that's what we're all trying to wrap our head around in here. So, as I said, Madam Speaker, I don't necessarily believe that captive insurance companies are a bad thing. What I'm more concerned about is how this is going to play out in regulations. And even when you look at Section 12 of the proposed piece of legislation, Bill 76, it says here, Section 12(1), subject to subsection 2, no captive insurance company shall be subject to any restrictions on its investments, provided that the minister may A, prohibit or limit any investment by a company, or direct the company, or B, direct the company to divest itself of all part or any investment that, in the minister's opinion, imperils the capital adequacy or liquidity of the company.
The honourable member for Lac-Saint Anne, Parkland.
Oh, thank you, Madam Speaker. And now first time for something completely different on the other side of the looking glass. I had a history lesson here that was something that Alice in Wonderland would have been tripping down a rabbit hole. So I'm really thankful for the different perspectives on reality and in the insurance market and what's taking place in Alberta, the energy sector. I really appreciate that. But I would like to talk about, I see the minister is intervening and I will give way.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the members' interest in captive insurance in Bill 76. I've found the discussion so far interesting around Bill 76 and the initiative to enable captive insurance in the province of Alberta. Madam Chair, I won't be able to address all of the questions in this minute. I believe I have 1 minute. I'm seeing a nod in this intervention, but I would like to start answering some of those. Madam Chair, we do have a hard insurance market. Certainly in the province, we have one within the nation, and in fact, really, I've understood that across the globe, there is a hard insurance market, and that's often the result of a hard insurance market is that there's limited supply, insurance supply, relative to demand. And there can be a number of reasons for a hard insurance market, Madam Chair. But we have one today. That results in very often premiums being priced right out of the market.
And thank you for that, Minister, of talking about the hard insurance market and how premiums are being priced out of the market. So again, there's a recessing pool. It keeps getting closer and closer. So when the members opposite are talking about ESG, environmental social governance, we also like to talk about economical environmental social governance. And when you're trying to project these projects or paint in a good light all the great things we do. We've talked about the hydrogen file earlier today and how we're leading on that. We're talking about lower greenhouse gas emissions. We're talking about all the great things. And oftentimes Alberta Energy is painted with a bad brush, and that bad brush being from 30 to 40 years ago, not current technologies, not the TIER program that's in place. And when the member opposite is talking about the NGOs that, yes, everybody in the industry knew and every Albertan suspected for years were being well-funded, lobbyists nonstop, going to the insurance companies, going to the banks, painting us with an absolute atrocious brush. This is yet another thing that we can't get the work done because we're having someone else tear the opportunities from our kids and our grandkids away. When we're talking about environmental damage, there's two items on the entire planet here that provide us, and let's talk about the biggest forests in the world, boreal forests, and we're talking about the Amazon, of which are the two biggest lungs on the planet. We happen to be sitting in the middle of the boreal forest. When our industry is flat out, absolutely 200% times what it is now, we're still at a carbon sink. But we can't get that message across the stage because, again, folks, like my very spirited friend from the opposite aisle paints an absolute wrong narrative. He would have you believe, and part of the reason why we can't get the insurance and part of the reason why we need to have a captive market is to put the finger back in the dam to stop it from busting on us. Because literally you're drying up the pond. You went after the environmental narrative, you went after the banks, and now you're going after the insurance markets. To what end? Yes, Minister, I will definitely allow you to intervene.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I absolutely appreciate hearing the passion from the member of Lac St. Anne Parkland when it comes to his passion for this province and for the people of Alberta. Madam Chair, I did want to say that when you experience a hard insurance market, it does result in very high cost premiums and, Madam Chair, very often a limited product offering. A limited product offering to where customers or prospective customers of insurance products can't find the products, in fact, that they need. And so, Madam Chair, I've heard with interest the member from Edmonton Rutherford ask some, I think, some very sincere questions around concern about risk. And Madam Chair, I do want to state this, that the superintendent will provide oversight. The superintendent of insurance in this province will provide regulatory oversight over captive insurance companies. There will be capitalization requirements.
And I appreciate the Minister for carrying on that thought, and absolutely. So to his point, there would be legislation put in place, there would be a superintendent who will oversee the risks. Alberta's growth in creating insurance options for businesses, it supports the jobs and the economic growth. Again, the well is drying up, and it's also pricing us out of the market. And wouldn't that be a shame if places like Venezuela were the ones supplying the world's energy? They have a fantastic human rights record. Great environmental activism down there. I worked with a lot of folks that got out of Venezuela when it changed from prior ideology to where it is now. And all we got to see is our future if we want to start looking at pushing that narrative too far for scoring points on Twitter rather than thinking about our grandkids' future. Captive insurance helps business to underserved in the current insurance market, particularly those undertaking large-scale projects. Yeah, we need a few of those. And we also have garnered interest. We're talking about the ethanol plant up in the Alberta heartland. We've got Dow coming up here, a massive facility based on our environmental record, based on our insurance. Hopefully, we can have these type of things in place. Giving Albertan jobs, getting our energy to market, doing the right things for the economy and for the environment. Economic, environmental, social governance. We have to tack the other E in there. Double E is better than one. And let's start singing from the same song sheet, I would ask the members opposite. If passed, Alberta would be the second province in Canada to allow captive. So again, British Columbia has done it, arguably pretty successfully. We have to look at innovations out here out west. We're not going to get anything for free down east. We always have to look at something a little bit new and innovative here. If passed, Alberta would be the second one, so we talked about that. Proposed legislation lays the groundwork for any establish their own in-house insurance company. So again, if there's enough pooling, if there's enough capital there, you can look at the transportation companies. CNCP, they do this. A lot of the big players will have a margin if there's a call or something that takes place, they'll cover off that larger call because they can afford it. I've even had constituents coming forward in different industries, aviation. Lloyd's of London seems to control the market there, and they're saying, hey, if we can apply this captive market model, maybe we can do things with aviation insurance. Maybe we can start self-insuring a bunch of these other items. Maybe we can pool in, maybe it's the ag side. It gives us flexibility and options. It's not the big boogeyman. It's not. Our goal in Alberta is to help businesses insure the risks. This is why we're taking the steps to allow more insurance options in the province to help deal with the current pricing and available pressures. We saw it on the automotive side as well. We have to change this. Here are some of the innovative items that the minister and his department have been working on. They consulted with the insurance industries. They were spitballing and coming up with clean sheet ideas of way we can do it, looking to other jurisdictions that have successfully done this. Globally, there's 70 other jurisdictions that do this. And as the member opposite had also mentioned, since the 60s, I don't have the information to corroborate that, but I'll take his word for it. If something's been around since the 60s, he would know. It's good. Alberta's proposed legislation was developed best using practices from BC, Vermont, Delaware, Bermuda, Barbados, and other successful global captive domiciles. And if the minister was wanting to take the last opportunity to intercede and clarify anything else or spark another idea from me, I would be more than happy to. Thank you, Minister.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I did want to follow up on my thought. I find these minutes just not long enough. I do want to say that this captive insurers will be regulated by the superintendent of insurance. There will be capitalization requirements, liquidity requirements, Madam Chair, And so Albertans can rest assured that they will not have to ultimately backstop the assets of any parent company that chooses to set up a captive. We heard, again, concerns from the member from Edmonton Rutherford that the captive insurance company may end up downloading asset liabilities onto Albertans. Madam Chair, I want to say this, that a captive insurance company will not possess the assets or liabilities of the parent. Those will belong to the parent, and the captive insurance company will simply provide insurance to its parent, Madam Chair. So there will not be any additional liability with the members' concerns. And Madam Chair, ultimately, enabling captive insurance.
And Madam Chair, with closing thoughts, and again, I thank the Minister for interceding and sparking those conversations, and again, his passion for Alberta, much to my own and members on this aisle that want to tell the true story. We want to tell a great picture, a great thing that can happen in this province if we just allow it. If we stop tearing at each other, taking our little virtue signaling points and jumping up and down for the Twitter feed and getting the Facebook likes or whatever else the motivation is. A lot of us on this side of the aisle are looking to the future, and it's bright. We're talking about diversification. We're talking about supplying the world's needs for energy. Russia did not stutter. Russia in 2009 carried forward their YAML project. 2017, they have it up and running, and they're supplying most of Europe's gas now. They're looking at icebreakers, 17 of them running back and forth because of climate change, the Arctic conditions. First time in 10,000 years that it's not going to be 40-year ice, Madam Speaker, that it's actually navigable. We're going to see the fish stocks follow that. There's going to be a lot of other things following that climate change, absolutely. It's not the boogeyman. There's things that we can do, impactful things that we can use in technology, as example, the TIER program. We have to look at innovative ways to make sure that we're there for the future, for the world, to do it in places other than, like Venezuela does. Let's do it the best that we can in this province to help pull this country together. And Minister, I fully support Bill 76 to allow this new innovative way to help ensure that we stay price competitive and to make sure that our industries are still there and that those good Albertans that have the innovative ideas can still keep rolling forward. So I strongly request, and hopefully my debate has changed some of the opinions of the members opposite, to understand that it isn't everything bad. We actually have a lot of really good stuff here. So please, look past your own boogeyman at the end of your face or your mask. Thank you.
Members wishing to join the debate. The Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to take a moment to speak to Bill 76, the Captive Insurance Companies Act. So we live in a world of increasing risk, much greater uncertainty in many respects. We have large shifts in our economies. We certainly have, as has been discussed by many members tonight from different and varying perspectives, the challenges of a shifting climate. And indeed, the issues that come with that, the member from Edmonton-Ellerslie quite accurately observed, we are seeing a significant increase in catastrophic events around the world, arising from climate change. We have seen many of those incidents here in the province of Alberta. Certainly we have seen some record floods, we have seen severe hail, and certainly we have seen our share of wildfires, though this past year we have, thankfully, not seen the kinds of impacts we have in previous years, but I do recall this past summer being in the Crow's Nest Pass, a place I have been many times before, and for the majority of my stay, not being able to see the majority of the peaks in the region, peaks that I know and love very well, but could not see because of wildfire smoke. Something I had never seen at that level in that region before in the many summers that I have spent there. So we recognize that there are real and significant issues, and those things are related. The major shifts we are beginning to see happening in our global economy, particularly around the energy sector, are related to those significant impacts we are seeing from the advancement of man-driven climate change. That we as a human species, through the burning of fossil fuels, have caused this increase in the global temperature, an increase that is going to continue and that we have to work to mitigate. And so as part of that, we have different people taking different approaches to how they advocate on that. And what we are talking about here tonight with Bill 76 is, as has been observed by members from different perspectives, part of those impacts. So we have energy companies that are in a difficult position and unable to find traditional insurance at all or at rates they can afford. And again, I would recognize that with these catastrophic events, that is something that is occurring for many individuals. We are seeing significant rises in insurance for people's homes and properties as a result of these catastrophic events. Now, we have seen much less action, of course, from this government towards helping those individuals, but that does not preclude that perhaps in this situation we do need to make this intervention to support these companies. We could certainly be doing both and, Madam Speaker, even if the government is only choosing to do one at the time. So recognizing that there may be reasons for this legislation, and certainly at this point I haven't heard any of my colleagues, and I'm certainly not saying that I would oppose this legislation. Certainly we have some questions and would like to get some more information and better understand. Now, one of the things as we are talking about risk here that does stand out to me is that with these captive insurance companies, sections 10 through 12 of this legislation establishes different investment restrictions than are allowed with traditional insurers. So simply put, these captive insurance companies are allowed to take on more investment risk than a traditional insurer. So what we're being asked tonight, or with this bill, we are being asked to authorize this government through regulation to determine what those more complex and higher risk investments are going to be, how that's going to work. We're being asked to authorize this government to allow that and to supervise that. Now, I think we have good reason, as some of my colleagues have noted, to question this government's ability to evaluate risk. For example, if we consider the situation with AIMCO and, of course, this very minister's passing legislation to seize teachers' pensions, force them to adopt AIMCO as their sole investment management. Just before AIMCO came under scrutiny in spring 2020, when their investment managers lost $2.1 billion, no thank you, Minister, on a risky investment strategy known as the volatility trading strategy, or VOLTS. Now, that strategy cost the Heritage Fund $411 million, was partly responsible for Alberta's nest egg hitting its lowest value in 8 years, led to their CEO leaving AIMCO. And of course, this government then also was considering and continues to consider potentially forcing all Albertans to put the CPP dollars in those hands. Now, certainly we have a new CEO at AIMCO, and certainly he has shown much more prudence, and I think we have perhaps a better hope in picture there. But again, that speaks to the ability of this government to evaluate risk, much as does their failed and rather embarrassing $1.5 billion gamble on the re-election of Donald Trump with the KXL pipeline. So on that front, again, I would say, and no thank you, member, I'm not interested in intervention at this time. So what we are seeing with this government is indeed that they have a very poor history of evaluating the value of risk. And indeed, most notably, I'd say with the most recent fourth wave of COVID in this province, we had a government which gambled on lifting all public health restrictions, ignored multiple warning signs that it was a bad bet. And again, we refused to take action until it was too late.
Of order is noted. The honourable member for Cardston-Siksika.
As is usually the case, Mr. Speaker, I rise in a point of order. 23B(I) on this member, who fails to usually stick to the substance of the bill in this instance, is no different. I've heard everything from COVID response to AIMCO losses to outright fabrications of the truth. And I would encourage the member from Edmonton City Centre to get back to the bill at hand rather than give his opinions on matters that are not germane to this bill regarding insurance and captive insurance. So, jeebers.
The honourable member for Edmonton McClung.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I see no reason to apply Section B. This is not a point of order. The member was certainly creating a picture of, with the context of the current situation and applying it to the legislation at hand, and I find that he should not be ruled out of order.
I'm prepared to rule on a point of order. I think that what we have here is a matter of debate. I will allow the honourable member for Edmonton City Centre to continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. $12,000 well spent. As I was saying,
Pretty sure that's not part of the bill, though.
I apologize and withdraw, Mr. Speaker. Now, as I was speaking to, this government is talking about giving insurers additional risk, the ability to take on more investment risk than traditional insurers. And that will be determined exactly how that will take place, the types of insurance products, et cetera, that this captive could offer in the regulations. So at some point during this debate, it would certainly be, I suppose, welcome to hear from the minister perhaps what is under consideration and what direction he may be considering going with that particular part of the bill. And we will look forward to that opportunity. But at this time, I would move to adjourn debate.
Members, having heard the motion to adjourn debate, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Under Government Bills and Orders for second reading, Bill 49, Labour Mobility Act, adjourned debate, Mr. Loyola.
The honourable member for Edmonton Ellerslie has some time remaining should he choose to use it.
Thank you very much.
Honourable member has 5 minutes remaining.
So much to say in so little time, Mr. Speaker. I know the members across the way get a little excited when I get up to talk because as the way that the member had stated, I like to speak about reality from my perspective. And they laugh again because, of course, as if that's something strange, as if you're not supposed to, as if my perspective is supposed to match theirs. See, that's the kind of world that they live in, Mr. Speaker. They want everybody to just agree with them. No, see, and then they belittle and make fun of people for not believing what they believe, which in fact is their perspective, Mr. Speaker. Sure, please, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to interject and add to the discussion. One of the speeches...
A point of order is noted. The honourable member for Cardston-Siksika.
Now, Mr. Speaker, now I know you heard that. I'm rising at 23 HI and J. The member from Edmonton Ellerslie, as he was sitting down, accepting the intervention, which is customary in this place now, and it's new for everyone I know. Maybe you can talk some sense into them. Like, if we're asking for decorum, as they are at this moment in time, maybe they can give some a little bit as well. I certainly find that language to be unparliamentary, unbecoming a member of the Legislative Assembly, and certainly ask the member to apologize, withdraw, and let's move on with debate.
Understand exactly what the objection is. I didn't hear anything out of order, so perhaps if you heard something, you might be able to rule on it, but as of this point, I certainly didn't pick up on anything unparliamentary.
I am happy to rule on it, and I did have the opportunity to hear what the honourable member for Edmonton Ellerslie said, and I do agree that making such comments, like you can talk some sense into them, is unparliamentary, and he's happy to apologize and withdraw, I'm sure.
Mr. Speaker, I apologize and withdraw.
The honourable member for Edmonton Glenora is on an intervention. She has 50 seconds remaining.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker, and I am reminded of some of the other speeches I've heard the member for Edmonton Ellerslie deliver in this place, and certainly his experience as a working person in this province is something that stands out to me. I know that, and we're here talking about labour mobility, and that's something that, of course, I think is a matter of appropriate concern and discussion in this House. I'm reminded of a speech he gave about when times are really tough and how he rolled up his sleeves, bought a lawnmower, and started a business. And I was thinking that this might be an opportunity to talk about some of the other working people in this province who are feeling left behind by the current government, and certainly welcome additional opportunities to learn about this member's lived experience and his small business. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the member from Edmonton Glenora for that interjection, and most definitely, see, like, the members from the other side of the House think that they're the only ones that actually know how to start a business from the ground up, as if nobody else has done it but them. Yeah. And here we go again. They can heckle all they want when I'm talking about perspective, but they're not willing to listen to the perspective that I have, even though I've had, I won't say the same experience as them, but a very similar one to them, from starting a business from literally the ground up, Mr. Speaker. And as the member from Edmonton Glenora rightly remembered, it started off with a lawnmower. And it turned into a landscaping business and a finishing carpentry business, employing over 8 people at one time. So I would ask the members from the other side that they listen to the perspective. That's all it is. In this House, we all have the right to speak to the perspective that we have. All I'm asking is for the other side to acknowledge that I am also having a human experience. I'm the one who's speaking right now. Hopefully you'll have a chance to speak a little bit later, member. But I'm wanting to finish up what I have to share in this House, because I'll be quite honest with you. It's getting a little dry, Mr. Speaker, that when other perspectives are shared inside of this House, they are belittled. You're made to feel less than. You're made to feel like you're not intelligent just because you have an alternative perspective. And not only that, Mr. Speaker, this is not only my perspective. This is the perspective of many of my own constituents.
The member's actually already taken three interventions. 2 prior to this evening. In his opening remarks, he now has, anyway, he's taken 3 interventions after the third. The honourable member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And well, again, all I'm doing is speaking to a perspective, and I wish that I would get a little bit of respect from the other side of the House. That's all I'm asking for. So as it relates to Bill 49 and the Labour Mobility Act, as I continue with my time inside of the Assembly, that I may express my concerns and the concerns of my constituents and that of many Albertans, I wanted to basically bring to the discussion. In Bill 49, with an appendix list, comes a number of occupations that the bill, in fact, would be creating the opportunity for people to become credited within the province. And I'm not going to belabor the fact that this party is basically chasing people out of Alberta. But what I do have a question about is that it doesn't even seem to match the short-term employment forecast of the government, or what's in the long-term forecast, Mr. Speaker. When you look at the list of occupations, they don't match.
The honourable member for Edmonton Glenora is next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I think this is my first speaking opportunity this evening, so to my colleagues, I appreciated the debate on Bill 76, and I'm happy to address Bill 49 in this Assembly. And I want to say that the title of this bill around Labor mobility, I think, is an important topic for us to be discussing in this place. Certainly, I can tell you that a lot of the folks I've been hearing from recently, particularly over the last year and a half, have been very concerned about the direction that this government has taken in a number of areas. And I think some of them, I know some of them, have resulted in net negative migration. For the first time in a decade, Alberta has experienced this net negative loss in terms of interprovincial mobility. And that certainly, I think, is an indicator of how some Albertans are feeling. Particularly, I've had Albertans reach out to me, or when I've reached out, they've told me, many healthcare workers, specifically doctors and nurses who I've spoken to over the last year and a half, many have expressed that they are either looking or have already accepted positions in other jurisdictions. And that, of course, is a big concern, something that I was quite proud of while we were in government just a few short years ago, was the fact that we had some labor rest and we had some stability in healthcare for probably the first time since AHS was created. And instead of having a government that embraced that opportunity that was created for them and working closely with doctors and with nurses and with all health professionals, the government chose to take a very different path. And certainly I will say that the first time I attended the AMA's representative forum, Alberta Medical Association's representative forum, it's a little bit nervous being in a room full of hundreds of doctors who certainly have an opinion and are very keen to share it with you as their health minister. But I have to say that the conversations, I think, were really good. I don't believe we missed a single representatives forum in the entire 4 years I had the honor of serving as the Minister of Health. And I think Alberta's public policy as it came to its relationship with doctors was better because of it. And I also want to thank the nurses, specifically UNA, for all the opportunities they created, and Karna did many as well. But for me to engage with nurses, frontline nurses, and to hear their policy feedback and get from them good advice from the front lines that I think helped us set a good path. And what nurses and doctors are telling me who are looking at leaving the province is that the compensation isn't the number one issue. The hours aren't even the number one issue, even though there are many, many nurses who choose to work part-time so that they can have some control over their life, many who have family obligations and want to be able to control some of their hours. And that certainly hasn't been the case for most of them over the last year and a half. The hours aren't even the primary concern. The primary concern, they tell me, is that they feel their employer has lack of consideration for their expertise. They feel that their employer, the government of Alberta, has lack of consideration for their safety. They feel that the employer, the government of Alberta, actively ignores science and evidence when it comes to making decisions around public health care and the safety and well-being of staff who work in healthcare, as well as the general population. And they feel that the current government has little respect for their children. And that has come back to me a few different ways. One, of course, is feedback on the state of safety and well-being when it comes to the education system right now. And another one, a very big one, is around the province's approach to curriculum and the way that the province has chosen to hire insiders, which was confirmed earlier this morning, weren't done through an open competition, hire personal insiders and allies of the Premier who have very clearly documented opinions that are racist. I was going to qualify the word racist, but it doesn't need qualification, because when you look at the posts of this specific individual and the long documented history, it is incredibly problematic. So that's one example within the curriculum. Another one, of course, is the fact that teachers were active teachers who used to be active in the actual drafting process and were active partners. And there was actually a ministerial order that guided that relationship. That ministerial order was rescinded, torn up, ended, and teachers no longer were given the opportunity to be active partners in shaping the curriculum. I will have much more to say, but I want to ensure that I have an opportunity to address an amendment that I'm proposing, Mr. Speaker. So I will keep one copy, not the original, pass the rest through you, and continue when you direct me to do so.
Honourable members, this amendment will be referred to as REF1. The member for Edmonton-Glenora has the call.
Thanks. May I have a time check too, Mr. Speaker?
8 minutes and 48 seconds.
Thank you very much. So when it comes to referral 1, and I'll read it into the record, I move that the motion for second reading of Bill 49, Labour Mobility Act, be amended by deleting all of the words after that and substituting the following. Bill 49, Labour Mobility Act, be not now read a second time, but that the subject matter of the bill be referred to the Standing Committee on Alberta's Economic Future in accordance with the Standing Order 74.2. And let me start by saying that I have great respect for the work and the potential of standing committees. I think that we use them most effectively probably during estimates. That's definitely one of the times when members of both sides and as well independent members would have an opportunity to engage in the inner workings and the financial matters related to a variety of ministries. And I think the work that is done through standing committees during estimates is something that is of benefit to this Assembly, to the members, and to democracy overall. I do have to say that I think there is great potential for them to be used even more effectively during additional times of the Legislative Assembly sitting and outside of session as well. We've recently had a specific minister try to justify incidents that have happened in this building and blame them on the long hours during session. And rather than that, I think that it's appropriate for us to look at the way that we conduct ourselves, the business that we conduct in this place, and the different opportunities we have to demonstrate to the public our significant desire to seek to improve the condition of all, which we're reminded of every single day, right? And I think that when it comes to opportunities for Albertans to achieve and seek full employment within their province, that should be a significant goal. And I think what committee could be more perfect than the committee that's supposed to look at Alberta's economic future, right? Because so often I know we replace focus with the important with focus on the urgent. And the urgent often doesn't lead us to the long-term positive outcomes that we could see. Often in this place there will be bills brought in that are addressing stopgap measures and short-term situations because there's a specific urgent need. But is it a long-term important goal? And I think there's times where you can achieve both. You can focus on the short-term important need, but you could also create conditions that will improve the condition of all. And I want to say specifically when it comes to economic diversification and creating opportunities for every child who lives in Alberta to see themselves staying here long-term and working in the field of their choice. That is one of the big goals that parents regularly talk to me about. They talk to me about the curriculum, which I've mentioned. They talk to me about their concerns that the curriculum isn't setting their children up for success, that the curriculum's coming from a specific bias or a specific angle. Francophone parents have highlighted the fact that there isn't a single Francophone school anywhere in the province of Alberta that's willing to pilot the draft curriculum. And they usually start by saying, thank goodness, we're glad that we're not experiencing that in our child's classroom, we're not being exposed to that. And then they go on to say, but how can it possibly be argued that a pilot that has no Francophone school input, no public Catholic or Francophone input when it comes to social studies or science curriculum at all, how is it possible that that draft can be considered a proper, valid place to test something when it hasn't been tested in any Francophone classrooms for any of the content, or in any public Catholic or Francophone classrooms for the social studies or science curriculum. You know, a government that claims to care a lot about the basics, social studies and science are pretty basic. We should probably make sure that we're creating a curriculum that teachers and parents, that educational experts are excited by. And these people dedicate their careers to this work. And many people in this province have been recognized nationally and internationally for their contributions in this work and have been treated by this government in such a way that has resulted in very public attacks against their credibility and their expertise, when they have been recognized both locally, nationally, and internationally for their credibility, for their expertise, for their knowledge, for their commitment. So when we talk about net negative migration, I hope that members of this place are thinking about the culture that's being created and what they're hearing back from many of their constituents. And I know that it's not just me as the education critic or me as an NDP MLA who lives in Edmonton, because I had the opportunity to read correspondence written by a UCP member, private member, former cabinet minister, the member for Grand Prairie, who very clearly articulated pages in summary of the very negative feedback that she received about the curriculum. So if she's receiving it, likely all of us are receiving it. And I will say that there is nothing that parents care about most than their children's opportunity for a bright future. When I talk to newcomer families who've immigrated from other countries to Canada and specifically to Alberta, and I say, what are some of the reasons why you chose to make your home here? One of the first things that's usually mentioned is opportunity through education, public education, that commitment that every child receives a world-class education. And that is absolutely being eroded under this current government, and it is absolutely impacting how parents feel about their child's opportunity for success, and in turn their own family's opportunity for success. So I appreciate that we have a bill that is looking at one aspect of labor mobility. I think that it would be wise for us to consider some of the underlying themes that families are experiencing right now as they continue to determine where and how they choose to raise their families. And this is a serious concern that I hope members on both sides of this House are really taking an opportunity to unpack. I do think that, again, this Committee for Alberta's Economic Future would be an excellent place for us to have an opportunity to engage in this legislation a little bit more. I think that this piece of legislation has probably many beneficial pieces and probably opportunities for improvement. And I think that when we come here, we can be collaborative and we can find ways to make sure that labor mobility is offering a net benefit to the people of Alberta. A lot of Albertans, I have to say, are still struggling to put together a robust family income to be able to have a home ownership as an outcome that I think every Alberta family that, anyone who works a full-time job should be able to aspire to home ownership. And I think, honestly, I'm thinking about a constituent who lives on Aish who every now and then reaches out and says, do you think there's any chance I'll ever be able to own anything in this community? I really like living in this neighborhood. Do you think I'll be able to one day buy a small condo? And one of the difficulties is in this work is that, of course, you want to be there and you want to be supportive, but you also want to be honest. And by taking away indexing, which maybe to members in this place, indexing for inflation wasn't a huge onerous impact for them, to some. For others, certainly it is. And seeing that minimal check already be eroded, the opportunity for a productive home ownership situation that would make him so incredibly proud seems even more unattainable. So I do have to say, I think that this would be a beneficial opportunity for us to refer this to committee and roll our sleeves up and work together to make it even better.
Honourable members, on Amendment REF1 to Bill 49, the Labour Mobility Act. I see the Honourable Deputy Government House Leader has risen.
Why, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to rise and speak this evening on the referral amendment moved by the honourable member from Edmonton, Glenora. Has record-setting investment. We have nation-leading economic growth. This is an environment that is ripe for people to come to Alberta and find gainful employment, the kind of employment that people can be proud of, the kind of employment that builds a province, and based on our previous history, what I suspect will be a rich history going forward, the kind of an economy that supports the rest of the country. We need a labor force able to meet the demands of this growing and robust economy. Just recently, we had the incredible announcement of Dow Chemical coming to this province to set up shop with just an incredible investment, a record-setting, a historic investment, all because of the environment, the economic environment that this government has laid out. So to my point, Mr. Speaker, we cannot delay in getting this legislation passed. I would not presuppose the outcome of any vote, but I would say that I will be voting in favor of this legislation. I will not be voting in favor of this referral amendment because I believe it stands in the way of progress that this province needs, and progress that will further enrich the lives of so many Albertans. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I will take my seat and encourage all members to not vote, to not support this referral amendment moved by the member from Edmonton and Glenora. Thank you.
On Amendment REF1, the honourable member for Calgary Buffalo.
Yeah, quarterbacking didn't get the message. I want to just refute some of the things were just said, Mr. Speaker, as well as support my colleague from Edmonton, Glenora, with her referral to the Standing Committee on Alberta's Economic Future. You know, Mr. Speaker, we do need a robust labor force in this province. And at this point in time, for the first time in 10 years, we have out-migration of people, including those who are of working age. And that's a problem, Mr. Speaker. That is not an issue that will necessarily go away with the repair of our economy. And it's going to take some time to repair, Mr. Speaker. That will not be an issue that goes away quickly. Because there are other things that people look for, Mr. Speaker. They, of course, look for job opportunities when they come here. In 1980, I came here because of job opportunities from Eastern Canada. And when I, just a little bit of a transgression, that's not the word. Talking about something else briefly for a second. When I look at the schedule and I see the Alberta College of Social Workers, in 1980 when I got here, it was not a regulated profession. There was no college at that point in time. And my employer looked at my credentials, my university credentials, and decided whether they wanted to hire me or not. So I do think it's a good thing that parts of this bill talk about facilitating the decisions of people who come here from Canada and have qualifications in one of these dozens of regulated professions, and that they can get their qualifications reviewed and sit exams in a timely fashion if that's what they need to do. None of that existed when I got here in 1980. And in the late 90s, the College of Social Workers was established. And subsequent to then, people who come here and want to practice in this province have to sit exams and other kind of references and things to get their registration. But that's not the problem, Mr. Speaker. The problem is people are leaving this province, and they are for the first time, as I said, in 10 years, that there's an out-migration of people. So we're losing people in this province. And it hasn't happened in a long time, obviously. And we need to figure out more around why that is and how we can keep people in this province, because as my colleague from Edmonton and Glenora suggested, people come here for a variety of reasons. They come looking for a positive place to grow their families, opportunity. They look for affordable housing. They look for a strong post-secondary education system. And it doesn't take too long to look into the news of the day, Mr. Speaker, to see where another university, another college, another institute is saying that they have to lay off staff, they have to pare down their faculties, they have to reduce the number of programs that they offer, instructors that they provide to meet the significant cuts to the budget that they are being afforded by this UCP government. I have a spouse, Mr. Speaker, who teaches at a post-secondary institution. She is a professor of nursing, and she tells me that many of her students are looking elsewhere for once they graduate. They are looking to the United States, they're looking to other parts of Canada because they're not confident that their future is in this province, in employment situations in this province. Going back in time, I certainly remember the mid-1990s when former PC government of Ralph Klein was in this province. And Mr. Speaker, now I may be kind of remembering things somewhat catastrophically, but I remember that whole classes of nurses in this province, particularly those at Foothills Hospital that were trained in training, were being sought after by employers in the United States, and they would have job fairs at the foot or hotels adjacent to the Foot, and those recruiters were looking to bring our nurses who had just gone through and were completing their studies after 2 years or 3 years of Foothills in hospital training. They're bringing them down to California. They're bringing them down to Texas. And I've probably said this before in this House, Mr. Speaker, but once those professional nurses trained here, working in the States, went down there, they were, in their early 20s for the most part. They found spouses, they found partners, and they have not returned to this province. And so the waste in the capacity of those young professionals, Alberta's loss in that case is palpable, and that's what this referral really gives us the opportunity to do in a transparent, in a eyes wide open kind of way. What is it that we are finding that we're losing? We're net out migration of professionals from this province. What is it they're not getting? What is it that is happening here besides the economic downturn that we've been in? Of course, we just heard that from across the way that we're nation leading in economic growth. That's because of the base. That's because we've dropped so much, Mr. Speaker, that 4% from a significant drop is 4%, but it's it's after losing a great deal. So we need to figure out why our labor force isn't staying here and why, what we can do to ensure that they do. My colleague from Glenora, of course, talked about other aspects besides post-secondary education. She talked about the education system in great detail. And she also mentioned about the healthcare system in significant detail as well. And I won't repeat those things here, but it goes to the environment writ large, not about the natural environment, but the environment, the context in this province that people are seeing. They're seeing significant fights with labor, whether those are nurses and doctors and teachers, and they're asking themselves, if they're in those professions, you know, do I want this? Do I want to keep fighting? Do I want something better? And so they're looking elsewhere, and they're using their feet, Mr. Speaker, to uproot their families and go elsewhere. I know personally a physician who has moved away from this province because of the significant fights that she was experiencing and the desire for something better, where her and her family can have some copacetic life together as opposed to always feeling upset. So I know people who have taken that step and have been part of this net out migration or loss of population from our province. I know that we need to change and turn things around, Mr. Speaker, and it's not just the economy that's going to do that. I think there are aspects of this bill that certainly make good sense in terms of facilitating the attraction, the ability of people to see their way through quickly, relatively quickly, not quickly, but relatively quickly to the profession they want to be working in a regulated fashion. But it doesn't fix the problems, Mr. Speaker. The problems will continue to be there. It just means that, you know, we'll have a churn in this province. And that's not where we want to be. That's not building up, keeping our capacity in this province. So anything we can do to retain the people and the labor and the skilled specialists we have should be done. We need to do. And if we don't do, as I said, we'll not learn. We'll not have an understanding of why people are leaving and going elsewhere. And it's not an insubstantial amount, Mr. Speaker, that Alberta invests in young professionals. It invests a great deal. And we need to keep them here. And the fact that they're deciding to go elsewhere is, frankly, it's not only our loss as a province, but it's really short-sighted. And so I think, Mr. Speaker, that a referral to having an opportunity together where we can look at what the challenges to our economic future are together is where we need to go. The critic area I'm involved with, Mr. Speaker, is municipal affairs. And like young professionals who go elsewhere, or even older professionals who decide to just, you know, throw in the towel because of all of the disagreements going on in this province. I can tell you that municipalities are feeling that same sort of not being respected, not being, you know, feeling always concerned and upset because they're not listened to, Mr. Speaker. Decisions are made without them being understood of the impact and implications at the municipal level. Things like MSI was cut unilaterally from municipalities, and that's just like professionals who are saying, you know, my job is being changed without our involvement, and it's because there's limited money that this government is putting into budgets for our most important things in society, namely health care and post-secondary education. I know that municipalities have the same sorts of concerns around this government. They don't feel, as I said, listened to and respected, and decisions are being made without their involvement. That's just like our citizenry. In many cases, feel the same way. And we need to change that, Mr. Speaker, and that's why a referral to the Standing Committee on Alberta's Economic Future is a requirement for us going forward so we can get a better handle together. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Bonneville, Cold Lake, St. Paul. It's my first day.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to stand and speak against this referral motion that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. The member talks about a migration out of the province and that we need to fix this, and we want to kick the can down the road for another 6 months or 8 months. It just doesn't make any sense at all. He talks about the migration due to the fact that we had 4 years of NDP government chasing $10 billion of investment out of the province. You know, I got my trade tickets in 1981, and we were in the middle of a pretty significant boom at that time. Refinery Row, Imperial Oil, I worked on the construction of that refinery, Gulf Refinery, Husky, Shell Scotford, all of these things were going on at the same time. I was on a bus one day going to the site out at Imperial Oil, 30 pipe fitters on the bus. I was the only one from Alberta. We need those guys back here again. We're heading down that direction. The Minister of Natural Gas and Electricity, Associate Minister of Natural Gas and Electricity, although it isn't getting picked up, looking at close to $30 billion of investment just that they've announced in the last 6 months and are announcing, you know, before Christmas. This is significant. We need these guys back here. We can't wait to we need to start recruiting now, building up that capacity and getting these guys here. We're going to be down there again. Bonnyville, Fort McMurray, my colleague from Fort McMurray is always talking about the significant growth up there. A lot of folks call that Little Newfoundland. I worked up at the plants up there back in the 80s again, you know, up on some steam lines up there, and I remember going into the dining hall, and on the long weekend I was up on a shift up there, and it was a long weekend. A lot of the guys couldn't go home, so the Newfies, they would get together around the dartboard and sing songs from Newfoundland and you know, reminisce, and you know, some of them got quite emotional about not being able to go home, but they moved here. Fort McMurray is very significant with a lot of Newfoundlanders and New Brunswick. Bonnyville's the same thing. I've got good friends that I worked up with there for 25 years that moved down here, raised their families down here because there was opportunities here. They're still here. Yes, there was some migration, but those folks will come back. When we have the stability of $30 billion worth of investment that's going to last for 10 years, those folks will come back. We need them here. The member also talked about doctors leaving. I know personally 2 doctors that have left our province and moved to BC. One of them is now seeking locum status in Alberta because she can't get enough hours and enough shifts in BC to pay her way because their housing is 3 times the price. They sold their house here, moved to BC at 3 times the price, and can't get the shifts to pay the bills. Oh, would you like to intervene? Okay, I accept that.
If you'd like to give way?
Intervention?
Okay, thank you.
I've needed intervention for a long time. But
well, you know, you said it, member. But I just wanted to take an opportunity to rise really quickly and point out to you, Mr. Speaker, of course, that the Brooks Bandits are now beating the Olds Grizzlies 9-1. But I also wanted to ask the member of Bonnyville, Cold Lake St. Paul if he could elaborate on the amount of workers from Alberta that were going to other provinces under the NDP and just how much of a disaster their government was for our energy sector, because I know that he has a lot of experience in that. And I just wanted to once again say, Brooks Bandits 9, Olds Grizzlies 1. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, thank you.
I think I provided some significant caution to members about the relevance of interventions and only be prior to the speech or the comments that were given of that speech. I'm certain that the honourable member didn't mention the score of a lowly hockey game that you saw.
Well, I was about to actually talk about hockey scores and how important it is to the province as well. So I welcome the intervention and the question. You know, I remember a portion of the time when the National Energy Program came in from the previous Trudeau government, and that you literally could not buy a job here in Alberta. And a lot of my friends had to go and work on the refineries in Ontario as well, in New Brunswick. So it does work both ways, and it's all about government policy. And we're on the verge of significant investment here in the province. We need to get that message out to our counterparts. I was with Local 488 at the time in the 80s, and we had travel cards from all over the country and the U.S. coming up here to work. We need to get that message out. $30 billion of investment. That's the news story that we need to get out to Albertans and to the rest of Canada and North America. And very, very happy to be part of that. So I'll be voting against this referral.
Are there others? In the name of going back and forth, we will see the honourable member for Edmonton City Centre, and that will be followed by the honourable member for Lac St. Anne Parkland. Followed by Edmonton Centre, followed by Lac St. Anne Parkland.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to rise and speak to Bill 49 and the referral from my colleague from Edmonton-Glenora. Now, I am in support of this referral amendment, which I know is a stunning surprise to all of my colleagues here in the House. You know, this is a bill, Mr. Speaker, that has the possibility of having some fairly far-reaching consequences for all of the organizations to whom this bill applies. Now, I don't think any of us disagree with wanting to have an efficient and streamlined system to bring qualified workers in from other parts of Canada when, in fact, our province needs them. And indeed, we have no objection to legislation which is going to accomplish that. But there are a wide number of organizations and regulators that are involved here, and they do have important work in ensuring that the individuals who are doing some of these very important tasks, and in some cases fairly complex work, are properly qualified and meet the standards to accomplish that work in Alberta. Now, the government tells us that indeed they held consultations with regulators, organizations, but as I've said in this House before, we have heard about this government's reputation on consultation. My colleague from Edmonton-Glenora spoke at length, or, well, at least for a bit, about the issues with this government's curriculum, and certainly that has shown their penchant for coming to the table having already determined what they intended to do. Or indeed, in many cases, we have had groups that have been left out altogether, as was been noted in, for example, their recent consultations on establishing an Alberta police force, and the chiefs of the Treaty 6 Confederacy noting that they were entirely left out of that conversation. So certainly we have good reason to question what consultations the government heard, particularly because there is no documentation. The government has not tabled a what we heard document. They have not issued a list of who they spoke with. They have not provided any context. They've simply brought this bill before the House. So taking this to committee would give us the opportunity to ensure that all those regulators and other folks, other organizations that are involved in important and essential work in vetting and verifying professionals that are coming to work in this province have been consulted on that we are not going to find ourselves in a situation where, and to use a term that was very popular with many of these members when they sat on this side of the aisle, unintended consequences. In particular, this is not something that is simply coming from myself and my colleagues. This is coming from analysis from independent third parties. Now, my colleague from Edmonton Millwoods was kind enough to forward to me some analysis that has been done by Field Law. Now, Field Law is a business law firm that is listed as one of the largest firms in Canada, with offices right here in Edmonton and indeed in Calgary. And they've taken the opportunity to take a look at Bill 49 and provide their perspective as an independent third party. And one of the things they note is that one of the noteworthy aspects of this bill is the limited amount of information that a regulator can require a labor mobility applicant to provide. So again, the regulator, it is their job to make sure this individual is qualified, that there are no issues, there are no concerns before they begin working in the province. Now, according to Field Law, the regulator can require that applicant to provide proof of certification in a Canadian jurisdiction. But they can't actually require that applicant to provide any additional information unless that information is prescribed in regulation. So again, we have a question about what is the government actually going to consider, how streamlined do they want to streamline this process? To what extent are they going to restrict regulators from perhaps asking about crucial information? Now, Field Law goes into greater depth in this because they note that, with this legislation, it in fact supersedes all other legislation. So again, if this bill says that they cannot ask about any other information, that overrides anything else, like, for example, the Health Professions Act, in terms of regulating how health professionals under that act could come and work in the province of Alberta. So Field Law, in fact, goes and definitely posit, well, can a regulator, in fact, actually ask a labor mobility applicant for information focused on good character, such as whether they have any outstanding complaints, investigations in their home jurisdiction? At this point, that would be up to the regulations. We do not know how restrictive the government might choose to be, the minister might choose to be in drafting these regulations, and whether or not that is a question that will be allowed to be asked of an individual applying to come and work in our province. Now let's remember, within this bill, the professions that are covered include a wide swath of occupations, for example, in healthcare alone. Acupuncturists, audiologists, chiropractors, dental assistants, dentists, denturists, physicians and surgeons, physiotherapists, psychologists, registered nurses, registered psychiatric nurses, social workers. So let's think about that. Those are individuals who are going to be, in many cases, in a very intimate position with the people that they are going to be providing care or services to. I think it is absolutely important and essential that a regulator be able to ask that sort of question, whether they have any outstanding complaints or investigations in their home jurisdiction. Now, indeed, at one point while we were in government, I know we had some very robust discussion around concerns about actions that were taken by physicians and ensuring that if they were sanctioned, that sanction stuck, because of the impact that could have on future patients and individuals, and indeed that very thing that individuals could choose to move from jurisdiction to jurisdiction to evade those types of sanctions or things that might be on their record. So Field Law is identifying and saying currently under this legislation, it would supersede anything in the Health Professions Act. So the question is, what is going to go into those regulations? So this is something, again, perhaps the government heard feedback on this. We don't know because, again, they have not published any of the information about who they consulted with and what, in fact, they heard during those consultations. We don't know if they were short or long. We don't know if they were robust or incredibly thin. So I don't think it's unreasonable then to say that perhaps this would be best referred to committee, where we would have the opportunity to have those discussions and sit down and hear from these regulators and perhaps indeed invite individuals like Field Law, who have kindly provided some of their analysis, to ensure that we are understanding a significant step that we are taking as a province if this bill is passed. And indeed, that is pioneering amongst any other jurisdiction in Canada. It goes further than any other province has gone. So if indeed, Mr. Speaker, we are stepping out first, I think it is prudent for us to step carefully and thoughtfully, which is another reason why I support this referral amendment and the opportunity to take this to committee. Because Field Law notes, they asked that question, can a regulator ask that information as required by the Health Professions Act relating to criminal records and sexual abuse issues? Again, which is superseded by Bill 49. And their answer is, not likely. Not likely, Mr. Speaker. Unless that information is specified in the regulations under Bill 49. Because they say Section 6.1 and 2 of the LMA of Bill 49 have the potential to be very problematic for regulators unless the regulations are properly drafted. So in some respects, Mr. Speaker, what we're being asked to do right now is to write the government a fairly significant blank check on, again, a piece of legislation unlike any which has been passed in any province in Canada to date. And again, I won't go into it extensively, but I think me and my colleagues and I have given many reasons why we do not have that good faith in this government. So I think the opportunity for us to take this to committee, to hear thoroughly from regulators and others who are involved, to ensure that something as significant as ensuring that individuals that are coming to work in medical fields in the province of Alberta are clear of criminal records and potential issues of abuse, that we are going to get these regulations right. Again, we are not objecting to the general principle of the legislation, to the idea that we want to make it easier for skilled professionals to come and do their work in the province of Alberta. Absolutely, Mr. Speaker. I think very highly of our province, despite many of the ways in which this government, I think, has undermined the quality of life, and certainly many of the important systems and institutions of this province. That's not something from which we can't recover should we have the opportunity to elect a better government in 2023. I think there are still many reasons why we could potentially attract people to the province of Alberta if we reverse damaging cuts to post-secondary, the undermining of our healthcare system, the incredibly problematic curriculum that the government seems to be intent on forcing through. But if we are going to put legislation in place to facilitate that, let us make sure we have thought this through, that we fully understand the implications, that we know precisely how these things are going to go. Field Law notes that regulators will need to engage with the government in the regulation development process to ensure that unintended consequences do not arise that will negatively affect public protection. That is the job of government, Mr. Speaker, is to protect the public. Now, certainly I've spoken extensively in this House and probably will again about how this government has utterly failed on that in things like the fourth wave of COVID-19. Unfortunately, put their politics first. But certainly as we look to potentially pass legislation in this House, we want to ensure that the government is fulfilling that duty. that they are stepping up to the plate. And indeed, as field law says, regulators will need to engage with the government. And as I said, we at this point do not know to what extent this government is actually engaged with the regulators in the province. And there is a lot of them, Mr. Speaker. I noted just a few of the health occupations that are listed here. Then, of course, we have things under justice like lawyers, locksmiths, private investigators, security workers, teachers, Mr. Speaker, teachers. So again, speaking of things like the regulation, indeed ensuring that teachers coming do not have issues on their record, previous problems, again, that also for the ATA is going to create some problems unless these regulations are drafted very carefully. We have things like early childhood educators. We have folks in agriculture. We have architects, interior designers, professional engineers, geologists, accountants, forest technologists, land surveyors, veterinarians. So, Mr. Speaker, we have dozens, if not well over 100, regulators that would be involved in this process. Has the government, in fact, sat down and spoken with each and every one of them? Each of the ministers that are involved in that? Have they actually sat down and considered the different impacts on each of those sets of regulations? We don't know because, again, the government has not published any lists of whom they have spoken with or indeed any documentation about what they spoke with when they did. For all we know, Mr. Speaker, it could have been a matter of days, it could have been weeks, it could have been months. We don't have that information, but we know that this is a significant impact for all of these bodies and indeed for these workers coming to the province and from that flowing then to the Alberta public. So I don't think it's unreasonable, given that case, unless the government wants to show its homework and give us more information about who they precisely spoke with and indeed what those conversations were, and table that here in this legislature where we can have the opportunity then to incorporate that as part of our debate. But given they have not done that to date and they have not shown any intention of doing so, I think it is reasonable that we then ask to move this to committee. We'll have that opportunity to ensure that protection for Albertans.
Honourable members, the Honourable Member for Lac-Saint Anne Parkland still, if he chooses to do so.
Let's make it really quick, Mr. Speaker, because we want to get back in the main bill. Did some quick at the back of the napkin calculations here. If I'm looking at the dollars and cents we're spending in this place, it's about $350 a minute. So the member just blew about $3,000 here, talking about something we should get back to the main bill. Questions of being, why are folks leaving the province? They're going to other jurisdictions where there's work. They're going to other jurisdictions where there's lower taxes. We worked really hard at the start of this to make sure that we could pull together a fulsome package so we could get workers coming across the province to come into the area and the jurisdictions. We talked about a lot of the work. Some others are burning down the province. The rest of us are trying to pull it together. So with that, I encourage everybody to vote down the motion. Let's get back in the main bill and let's spend the taxpayer dollars appropriately.
Are there others? The Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Get back to some sensible conversation. I want to address the issue of the reason for referral, first off, in my conversation, and then provide a little bit of a larger context for that argument. I know that the MLA from Bonnyville Cold Lake St. Paul essentially made the argument that we have an immediate problem. Why don't we have an immediate solution? Why, kick it down the road, I think was the expression used for 6 months. And I think the answer is actually in the statement that the member made, and that is that he's acknowledging that this is about finding a quick fix for a problem, not a resolution of the underlying problem, but rather a quick fix in order to be able to resolve a problem that exists. And of course, it has all of the downsides of all quick fixes. When the table leg breaks and you decide to, take the old lamp from the den and take off the light bulb and stick it underneath the table in order to hold it up, it certainly will, provide the resolution that is necessary in the moment. But it presents you with a variety of future problems. For one thing, it doesn't look very good, but secondarily, of course, it becomes dangerous. It's not really actually made to fit properly. The relationship between the quick fix and the larger existing entity is not a proper and well-constructed and well-designed fix. And I think that we have to be a bit careful when we say the reason why we brought this bill into the House is because we've created a problem and now we need to kind of jam in something in order to hold up the table long enough for us to move forward without understanding that that's inherently problematic. Just by its nature, I think we should be cautious. Now, I don't disagree with the quick fix from time to time. I've certainly been known to do a little clumsy craftsmanship with carpentry in my own life. But I fortunately have a much wiser spouse who understands that this will not stand long and will need to be replaced sooner rather than later. But legislation isn't of that nature. You don't bring in a quick fix knowing that you're going to have to replace it. The second that the problems begin to arise, and you also shouldn't use a quick fix when you can actually take the time to do it right in the first place. When you can actually look at the problem and say, this is a systemic problem, a structural problem, an issue that has a depth and history behind it that can be addressed. And I think that's what we also need to address here at this particular time, that we cannot do if we do not have this referral. And that is, we have a problem in this province that, for some reason, well-minded citizens have decided to leave this problem in droves. And that doesn't make you want to stop and say, what the heck is going on? That people are trying to get the heck out of town at this particular time, then you're really missing the message of the mass exodus out of this province. And of course, this is the first time that this mass exodus has happened in many, many, many years in this province. I remember under the last government, the now premier made an accusation that there was a net migration out of the province to the previous government and had to apologize because, in fact, it was not true. But in this case, it is true. It is true that there is a net migration out of this province. And so if we're not going to use the quick fix, if we're not going to use the lamp from the den in order to fix the table, the broken table leg, then we should certainly be asking ourselves, why is it that people are leaving this province? And that's the reason for a referral, because we get to ask that question in depth. We get to say, what is it about the defunding of universities and other post-secondary institutions in this province by this government that has caused people to become upset? What is it about the ongoing war with health workers and doctors and nurses that has caused people to be upset? What is it about the threat to take wages away from people who have saved us through this epidemic, through their incredible ongoing devotion to the well-being and the health of this province, that has caused them to feel like they need to leave this province? What is it about the behavior of this government that has resulted in Albertans making a decision after often lifetimes of residency in this province and education and labor force participation in this province, has caused them to say this province is no longer in the best interests of myself and my family? That's the kind of question that we need to be asking ourselves. We need to be looking at the behaviors of a government that have caused people to be fearful for themselves and their families' future and to seek employment in other places because the lack of hope that exists in a province that has been so aggressive in its neglect and disregard for the well-being of the professions that are mentioned in this act. So having a referral would allow us to actually do the job right and to not just simply come in and apply a quick fix in order to be able to get through the moment. I'm actually somebody who, as I mentioned in my previous comments on this legislation, somebody who believes in having open migration available for labor in this country. I think that there's some very positive reasons for us to have that to happen. But in this case, the reason why we have a problem that needs to be addressed is the behavior of this government has resulted in some very negative outcomes for this province and negative outcomes for individuals and their families. And so that's what it is that I think we have to address. And I think that if we go back and we have those conversations, we can begin to say, what is it that we need to do to ensure that people who have been born and raised in Alberta, who have come to Alberta to participate in the betterment of this province, actually believe that continuing to be resident in this province is a positive and good thing. That doctors who we have invested hundreds and thousands of dollars into their education actually turn that education back into the benefit of this province, rather than taking the benefits of our elementary, high school, and post-secondary educations and taking all of that input that we have given them and delivering their services in another province. We should be asking that question. We should be asking, what happened in the hospitals that makes you say, this is not where I want to stay? What is it that's happened in terms of the funding of hospitals, of the funding of research, the funding of scientific endeavor that has resulted in you not believing that the knowledge you have gained and the skills you have acquired are best served by remaining in this jurisdiction? That's the kind of question I think that we can have answered if we have a referral to committee. And as a member of the committee that we would like to have this referred to, I would be very anxious to have an opportunity to ask those kinds of questions. I also would like to be able to have an opportunity to ask questions about where are we going to have problems from applying this quick fix? And I think the member from Edmonton Centre identified some important points there. And I'd just like to reinforce some of those points, because I think they are very much important. For example, the timelines in this bill, which again is showing how rushed this program is, are much reduced from the timelines that existed under the previous act. And I think the Fair Registration Practices Act. And I think that we have to ask ourselves, is there a reason why we're trying to rush this forward? Under the Fair Registration Practices Act, registration organizations had an opportunity to spend 6 months to properly evaluate. But under this act, it's as little as 10 days to receive information, 10 days to make a decision, and 10 days to inform. So really, a decision is made at 20 days. So I have some concerns about that, because as someone who has had to actually assess credentials of students coming from institutions other than the one in which I was working, it was fine if I had certainty that the credentials presented were in fact reflective of the institution that they say it was. And it turns out that sometimes that is not true. People present credentials that actually are not validated in time. There's a horrendous case, for example, at MacEwan University once, where they hired someone and kept them on for 20 years and found out after the fact that they didn't have any of the degrees that they said they had at all. That's a dangerous situation to put ourselves in. It worries me that we'll have institutions trying to make rash decisions rather than responsible decisions. And what's more is that sometimes I might have known about an institution. If somebody came from McGill University, for example, I certainly know the institution. But if somebody came from a smaller university, somewhere in Eastern Canada, I often wouldn't know the name of it. I wouldn't recognize it. I wouldn't know whether that's a legitimate institution to have provided the accreditation that the person presenting to me is saying that it provides. And so a little time to check that out is fine. And in addition, there is a concern with many professions that you're checking out more than simply the academic qualifications or the trade certification of individuals, but you're also trying to check out something that may be generally referred to as an ethical background check for potential candidates. We certainly have had incidents here in the province of Alberta. For example, I can remind people without using names of at least one doctor who had arrived here in this province who was essentially fleeing sexual assault allegations in another province and came here and was engaged in inappropriate sexual behavior with patients. And that might have been determined if there is some time taken to check things beyond simply the credentials. Certainly this doctor had the credentials that were necessary in terms of being an MD. But there are other problems. And I know in social work, for example, we don't simply ask people to have a degree. We also often ask them to provide a police check or a child welfare check. And I know governments try to provide good services to citizens, but I can tell you, even the government of Alberta, under this government, is very rarely on top of things so well that they can provide both police checks and child welfare checks within a 10-day period. And yet, many professions, that's absolutely essential to ensure the well-being of the clients that will be served, well beyond the credentialing itself. And yet your decision is only allowing 20 days for all of this to occur. So I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about the rush here. And I'm concerned about this being a quick fix that's just going to try to repair a problem that's actually been created by other decisions of the government. Let's go back to those other decisions. Let's take some time. Let's actually look at how we can actually improve circumstances here, how we can raise the people up in this province to fulfill the needs of this province without having to pull people in from abroad, when instead it may be much more valuable to us over the long term to ensure that we are providing ourselves with a sufficient number of people and labor resources to meet the needs of our own province. That would be a good thing. And as a member of the committee, I would certainly love to have an opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Are there others? The Honourable Member for Edmonton Millwoods has risen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise to speak to the referral amendment that we are currently on regarding Bill 49 in the Labour Mobility Act. I've had the pleasure and opportunity to speak to Bill 49 at second reading, and I rise in support of this amendment, which would allow us to, at the Standing Committee on Alberta's Economic Future, really ask some in-depth questions as well as speak to stakeholders. Now, I have a number of points I'd like to make regarding Bill 49 and the need to send this to committee, Mr. Speaker. First and foremost, being that so much of the implementation of this bill and the impact of this bill on over 100 regulated occupations has been deferred to regulation. And so the key aspect of Bill 49 is going to be making sure that those regulations are drafted in full consultation with each of these regulated occupations, with these professions. And leading into this, I think it's important to note that as I'm talking to stakeholders about this, there's been some real concerns about the consultation that has taken place thus far. that it was done in a very quick manner in August of 2020, that some members who were consulted said it felt more information out, that the government had already chosen a decision, and quite a few were surprised when the bill was introduced here in this session. So when we talk about the regulations, we're starting off on the wrong foot when I'm hearing directly from the heads of major organizations saying that they did not feel that there had been adequate consultation prior to the introduction of Bill 49. Now, the second concern that I'd like to speak to is that the goals of this particular bill are goals that I think are important and that I support. Labor mobility, facilitating the registration of qualified professionals, ensuring that when someone's made the decision to come to Alberta, that their credential recognition process can flow smoothly. I think this is really important. One of the interesting things that I've found as I've been talking to stakeholders is for a lot of the occupations that are being covered here, they already have mutual recognition agreements, long-standing agreements in place to meet or exceed the timelines outlined in this bill, meaning that the introduction of Bill 49 for a great deal of potential occupations may have very little impact. So it won't actually make a material difference in some cases of having qualified, skilled, trained Canadians coming to Alberta to find work. And I think that's a really important aspect of this to be discussed because the government has put this bill forward under the Premier, not the Minister of Labour even, and is touting this as the major jobs bill of this session. And yet, for so many of the organizations this impacts, they're already doing it. This isn't going to create a new job. This isn't going to bring a new person. Now, there are some smaller organizations that are potentially going to have impacts. And given the wide range of organizations, this is one of the reasons why I support it going to committee. There are some of the occupations and organizations that are essentially operating as a nonprofit, that are running with volunteers to do some of this credential recognition work. And I'm concerned that their perspectives and their voices may not have been heard through the consultation process. Now, one of my first comments was the deferral to regulations of major decisions in this bill. I would like to point out that we've seen something very similar in the Fair Registrations Practices Act, the FRPA, that this legislature saw debated in 2019 that also deferred to regulations, regulations that are still not complete at this point. The timelines that would allow someone who is foreign trained from a country other than Canada to know that their credentials would be recognized in a timely way, this government has not written and implemented. So if this bill is deferring to regulations, exactly under what timeline are we looking at to have that done, and has that background work taken place? A lot of these concerns I would be interested in discussing at the Standing Committee on Alberta's Economic Future, because we would have the opportunity to find out more about the potential impacts of this legislation, as well as how it interacts with the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, which already has clauses to guarantee labor mobility. That so many have national accreditation and certification standards really causes me to question that when the government is talking about creating good jobs and attracting workers to Alberta, this is being presented as a solution when I do not think that it is. And when we talk about attracting workers to Alberta, particularly now having been through a pandemic, certainly I have concerns that the government is not focusing its attention where it should be. And it's important that we be able to assess this and have those discussions at a committee. One of the other concerns that I've certainly been made aware of, and I would thank my honourable colleague from Edmonton City Centre who was referencing the field law analysis, is one that I've heard from stakeholders as well, which is the limitations by the regulation on the information that their organization would be able to request from someone who is applying for credential recognition, specifically when it comes to code of conduct type behavior, when it comes to their professional standing in other jurisdictions, had there been other complaints, some of those other more nuanced questions. The fact that the legal analysis from a leading law firm has identified this, as well as stakeholders, raises in me large concerns that we need to know that these types of concerns will be taken into account and can be addressed through the further debate as well as the work done on this piece of legislation. When it comes to sending a piece of legislation to a standing committee on Alberta's economic futures or another, I do want to highlight that it gives all members an opportunity to be able to attend those committee meetings, review their records on Hansard, to ask questions, and to have certainly more in-depth analysis and discussion on a potential piece of legislation, as well as the ability to call witnesses and guests to be able to speak to this piece of legislation and its potential impacts. For those reasons, I do support this amendment. Bill 49 and the goals of the Labour Mobility Act, I think are very important, but in its current implementation and given the concerns that I'm hearing from stakeholders, being told that there wasn't proper consultation, that too much is being deferred to the regulations, that similar regulations related to almost the identical same challenge, but speaking to foreign credential recognition, that those regulations have stagnated and not been completed in 2 years. These are major concerns that I think need to be addressed. And I do, again, want to recognize that so many of the organizations who've been named in Bill 49 operate at the highest professional and ethical standards, have been doing the work to ensure that there are not unnecessary delays in credential recognition. And so at the same time as I worry about the implementation of this bill, I simply have to ask if the government has really looked at what is facilitating workers to come here to Alberta and the factors involved when we see what's happening in our political system with this current government, with the fighting with workers, doctors and nurses, the challenges with curriculum, which I've heard raised in the debate on Bill 49 already, when we see the mismanagement in the COVID-19 pandemic, and then we ask, are people coming to Alberta? The answer right now is they are not. And that change has been under the UCP government. That change of more youth workers not staying here, going to university elsewhere and choosing to leave Alberta has happened under this UCP government, because so many of our young people do not see their values reflected in this government, do not agree with the choices being made by this government. And I think this is a really big issue. I know it is. Alberta has typically attracted the best and the brightest, and we're not seeing that happen now. I've heard the members opposite try to deflect and to blame previous governments. The facts do not bear that out. The numbers and the statistics do not bear that out. It is under your government that youth and other Albertans are leaving this province, that we are seeing a net outflow of migration. And I think if members of the government caucus are not prepared to have an honest and open debate about that, we have some serious concerns. And again, we would be able to have more of those discussions at the Standing Committee on Alberta's economic futures. And so, for these reasons, I will be voting in support of the amendment that my honourable colleague from Edmonton Glenora has put up. And I thank her and other members for joining into this debate. And I appreciate the opportunity to share a few of my thoughts. I look forward to continued debate around Bill 49, about labor mobility, about attracting workers to Alberta, about creating good jobs, and building Alberta as the best and the brightest province that we know it can be. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, are there others on REF1? Seeing none, I am prepared to call the question. Honourable members, on Amendment REF1, as proposed by the Honourable Member for Edmonton Glenora, all those in favour of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. No. In my opinion, the noes have it. That motion is defeated. Honourable members, we are back on the main bill. Are there others wishing to speak to it? If not, I am prepared to call upon the minister to close debate. Correction. Honourable members, on second reading of Bill 49, the Labour Mobility Act. All those in favour of the motion for second reading, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. No. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Bill 49, Labour Mobility Act, is now read a second time.
The Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate everyone's hard work this evening. Albertans are well served by the members in this chamber, but at this time I move that the Assembly be adjourned until 9 a.m. Wednesday, November 3rd, 2021.
Members, having heard the motion as proposed by the Deputy Government House Leader, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered, and the House stands adjourned until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.
Thank you.